So we are very pleased tonight to have our public hearing on the Fall Town Meeting warrants. And I thank all of the folks who are here to present tonight, especially the petitioners for their engagement in our town government. So thank you all for being here. We are going to start with, and there's an agenda up front if you didn't get one on your way in. We are going to start with the Board of Selectmen sponsored articles. Pardon?
I got one.
Hello.
Good evening.
Please introduce yourself, your name and where you live, please. Yes, please.
Charles Flahive, 21 Glen Road, Westwood, and proud of it. Been there since '72, and member of the Blue Hills Regional Vocational Technical School. I'm here tonight to ask your support for the school building renovation project. I think I distributed some folder with a lot of facts and figures in it. I don't think that I have to go through every page of that. Boy, you'd be here for a while. However, just a little information on where we are. About 6 years ago, we decided that the building was in dire need of massive renovations. So they started the process of applying for aid from the Mass School Building Authority. And I noticed in the brochure, I believe you have that it's an $84 million project, and they have applied. We were approved of it. The way the steps go, we use our some capital funds we had to start the application process. We applied for the grant. We got it. We were very happy. The Mass School Building Authority will pay 55.89% of the cost of this project, which is great. It's an $84 million project. Also, for your information, Blue Hills has 857 students from 9 different towns. Currently, Westwood, we have 8. 4 of them are seniors. We've never, years ago, the towns were voted on quotas, and I believe back in the 70s our quota was about 25, which we never fulfilled. However, we may only have right now 8 kids. It goes anywhere from probably 5 or 6 to 8 to 9. However, it's important for those kids. It offers them a great alternative for vocational education and other different programs that Blue Hills offers. We're made up of 9 towns. I think that's in your brochure. The towns are, we are by far the smallest. Randolph is the largest. Randolph, out of 857, they have probably 31% of students from Randolph. The way it goes from here on in is that we go to the different towns, give out the information on our project, our wishes. Every town must vote to accommodate and to accept this project. If, by chance, one town does not agree to vote, then it goes to a general election throughout all 9 towns, and then it will be the results of a general open election. So far, in most of the towns that have been visited, we have very positive feedback. As I say, the project has a number of things. You have a folder here that we packed out. You can look through that. It tells you what we're doing. But just generally, it will make the building accessible for all, which is very important. There are many safety improvements that will bring us into ADA and state compliance. Right now, we're not. We do not have a sprinkler system. A couple of places we need elevators, et cetera. And these are all included in the renovation. Our plumbing systems are in disrepair. The electrical system is antiquated, and along with all of these other general repairs, we need new doors, windows, entries to be installed, and energy-efficient systems will be up in place to improve the whole environment of the school and for the kids. When I worked, as most of you know, I was at Westwood High School for several years, shall we say, and I never spent too much time at Blue Hills, but it does have a lot to offer for kids. There are about 12 different vocational programs, and of course, when you're working in metal shops, et cetera, and auto body and so on, you really have to be very safety conscious. So some of those vocational areas are in dire need of repair, okay? I also distributed, this is just for your general information, and thanks to Ms. McCarthy. This is the count, sort of interesting, of how many kids come from different towns. And the assessments that we receive are based on the number of students that we have at the school, plus what they call the state foundation system. The state sets a figure based on such things as the wealth of the town and the salaries, et cetera, average, et cetera. So that there's quite a spread between some of the towns, such as Holbrook, Randolph, et cetera. A second sheet that is out is what this would cost. And this is based on a probably 3% interest on the money that would have to be borrowed. There would not be any charge until 2020, and the numbers are based, as I said earlier, based on the number of students that you have, and it's like a 4-year average. Every 4 years it's set. We have 4 seniors this year, but I have no way of knowing how many freshmen are coming in next year. A couple of us members on the board, we changed it a little bit so that we could take sophomores, and so there are a few sophomores there this year. It used to be you went in as a 9th grader. If you didn't go in as a 9th grader, that was it. And so that wasn't quite, in the 9th grade, who knows, I never thought I'd be a school teacher when I was in the 9th grade. Anyways, that's generally what we're looking to do, and if, assuming that you all have the folder here on the renovation project, I'd probably say best if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them to the best of my ability. But what we're looking for is Westwood's endorsement of this program. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Flahive. And as you probably know, this is, I believe, the 3rd time we've discussed this this fall, so we've had many of our questions answered before tonight, but thank you very much for your presentation. Further questions from FinCom? For Mr. Flahive? Yes, Peter.
If one community or more does not vote to adopt this initially, and then it says it goes to a vote, how does that really work?
It's, these rules this was put in place years ago, and when I first went on this committee, I said, "What?" To answer your question, say, "What? Why would you do that? Why does this happen? If you don't hold a meeting and voted for something, automatically means you accepted it." And that's not quite, Mike knows that, Mike Gillette. And, give me a question.
It's just, say if a community voted not to
Voted
adopt it, against it, and then
Right.
you said it went to an overall vote.
Right.
Okay, how does that overall vote work?
You have to have
Mr. Flahive, I'm sorry, could you use the mic, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. You have to hold a town meeting, which the school, I believe the school pays for, and everybody goes to vote, and it's the number of yeses beats the noes, and it flies. Then you override. You're overriding the town that doesn't want to do it.
So it's just a majority rule?
Just the majority to the end, yeah, which is, and that's something that we, hope to avoid. I don't know how many people would be happy doing that. I know that Dottie Powers wouldn't, so. Okay, any questions? Does that answer your question, sir? Yeah, it's really, yeah, it amazed me when I heard that. I said, you know what, that's all I have to do is go have a town meeting to vote this? It's hard. So that's why we're trying to make sure everybody has the information that they need to make a good decision, which I hope will be a positive one.
Yeah, quick follow-up, Mr. Flahive. So I'm just wondering how the different weighting of the towns, I guess, is reflected in the vote. So if, say, Westwood were to approve their portion of the dollars, how does that differ from, say, Randolph, who's 31% of the student body? So is it just 9 different towns voting equally for their share?
So actually, Westwood has a bargain when you look at it that way. It's a real bargain. Figured out roughly over 30 years, Westwood will be spending $523,000 for the kids there. That's approximately, you know. But it doesn't matter how many kids you have there as far as your assessment goes.
So I guess I'm just wondering how the whole project gets approved if some towns vote in favor and some don't, and how does Westwood have an equal vote, I guess, in the grand scheme of things?
It's a majority. To the best of my understanding, I'm still learning some of this. This is the first time in, I think, 52 years that Blue Hills has done this.
Yeah.
It's just a majority vote.
So what happens if the majority of the towns vote it down? The
It's
project
dead.
does not.
It doesn't fly. And if someone I think can still challenge it, it would probably go to a challenge it again, an election, to vote. And but that's a difficult part. And you probably one of the schools recently is putting up a new building out in Lexington, and a couple of towns had questions on it. And with Drew, you could, you know, if you wanted, if we didn't have Blue Hills, we'd probably be tuitioning in kids to other schools. You know, kids that need special courses, special programs, and so you know this is a bargain. It's good, you know, and like I say, we only have 8 kids, but those 8 kids are happy that they're there, and you can walk into a school and see, you know, how the sense, the atmosphere, and kids love the school. They spend so much time in academics, and then they spend so much time in their vocational programs. A lot of them go on to 2-year programs. A lot go on to Massasoit, which is right next door. It used to be the old Blue Hills Institute years ago. So,
Other questions for Mr. Flahive from FinCom? Questions or comments from residents on this article for Mr. Flahive? I do not see any, sir. Thank you very much.
get off easy, huh? I think
You did.
does this board vote now, or I'm not sure?
We will vote on this later tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
No, it's a vote, as though we were one giant unit. So for 100,000 residents in all the towns, 50,000 one vote comes through. Because each town has an individual vote right now if it wants to approve it or not. Then it's gotta go to I think it goes to town meeting. And then,
But that's, I'm sorry, so that's 100% participation in the vote?
yeah, but if we reject
And
it,
with that, we will
then we end
welcome
up
the
having to do it to town.
Board of Selectmen. Mr. Walsh, Mr. Gillette,
It's like we're one giant town.
Ms. Hyde.
That's what?
Welcome. Good evening. So you have several articles before us tonight.
A lot less than we started with. Yes. So I'll start with the Gay Street Sidewalk. Gay Street Sidewalk was first talked about 2 years ago, the first year of the Complete Street program. The Complete Street program for the new members is a program that the state instituted a few years ago to encourage cities and towns to design roadways that accommodate not only the motorists, but also accommodate pedestrians and bicyclists. And they encourage, through a funding program, designing and then constructing sidewalks and bicycle lanes on these roadways. The town has been very active. We're one of the first towns to come up with a policy, And a couple years ago, we made our first submission for $400,000. We were the top community in what we received. And part of that submission was based on an appropriation we sought at town meeting for the design, conceptually, the survey and design of a sidewalk on Gay Street, and it was to connect both sides of the community. We have finished the survey, the conceptual design of a sidewalk that would run on either side, so that it'd only be on one side at a time, but it shifts as it goes down the roadway a couple times. And in order to proceed to funding for the Complete Street program or other programs like the Safe Routes to School, which is another state-funded program which we've taken advantage of in the past, we need to finish the design. We also need to finish the design because of the concerns expressed by the neighborhood. The neighborhood is concerned with the aesthetic impact of this sidewalk. They're particularly concerned about the trees and the stone walls along the side of the roadway. It's a county way, so those make up the stone walls make up the edge of the right of way. And so, in order to show people what it would take to maintain the aesthetics at the same time provide a sidewalk, we really need to get into more in-depth design of the conceptual plans that have been developed. There are folks along Gay Street and the side streets that are very much encouraged by this because it will accomplish that safe routes to school. Walking along the edge of Gay Street, if you've ever done it, is not a particularly safe environment. It's very narrow on the edge. There's hardly any pavement inside of the white line. So the appropriation being sought is $225,000 from free cash in order to complete the design. The promise made to the neighborhood is that we'll continuously through the design at the 25%, 75%, and 100% design levels. We'll check in with the neighborhood, show them what we've developed, discuss it, and modify it as seems to make sense to come up with a design that's most acceptable to the neighborhood but accomplishes what we're looking to accomplish.
Thank you, Mike. And I just wanted to mention that as with the Blue Hills article we just heard about, FinCom is now hearing about this article along with many of the articles we'll be discussing tonight for a second or perhaps third time. So a lot of our questions have been asked and answered at this point, and just wanted you folks to be aware of that. Are there questions from FinCom on this? Yeah, Jim?
How many times are you planning on the sidewalk crossing the street? I mean, if we're talking about safety, wouldn't we want to keep the sidewalk down one side of the street?
Brendan's here.
Like Mike suggested, I'm Brendan Ryan. I'm the Assistant Director, Operations Manager for the Department of Public Works. A couple different conceptuals that we have. There's one of them that will be at Thatcher Street, and then that Thatcher will continue down and carry onto Buckboard. And the second conceptual we came up with is further down the road in between Milk and Sandy Valley. So we're obviously looking to only cross the road here once.
And is the road going to shrink when you put the sidewalks in? So are we bringing cars in closer proximity? So you're taking and this is going to also be a bike lane on the road?
Bikes will probably have to do, and that's all stuff we can address with the design. Bikes might have to accommodate onto the sidewalk itself in some areas of that roadway. If we can, we'll try to incorporate that with the design to keep it on the roadway.
If I could ask a follow-up to that. I asked this last time, but as I understand it, there is going to be a safety study done in conjunction with the designs. Is that accurate?
Yeah, Jonathan, that's something that we typically do.
And if I could...
Jonathan Rockwell from TEC, the engineering company that we'd be utilizing for the design.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you. And if I could just add to my question, you know, in that, given the safety concerns that have been raised, will we be thinking about a sidewalk going up one side the entire way?
Yep, our initial concepts depict a sidewalk on a single side of the roadway. There has to be one crossing somewhere between High and Buckboard to tie back into the existing sidewalk on the south side of the road in Buckboard. Again, our initial proposals were looking at a uniform width of kind of narrowing up the roadway a little bit to help reduce speed somewhat to probably somewhere in the neighborhood of a 24-foot wide roadway. And then as part of the initial planning that we would do, as part of project development, a study would be done where we take traffic counts, speed study, and incorporate those elements into the detailed design moving forward.
That's great, thank you.
And we did have two public hearings as well, outlaying this information. So we've taken a lot of that information from the residents, and obviously the need for speed, especially with one of the last meetings, the Tresca trucks. So there's a lot of different variables we'll look into when we do the design.
Thank you. Other questions, Rob?
How long is the process supposed to take, the planning process?
I mean, I think at this point, the town's intent, DPW's intent is to initially seek state funding for the project. And that process, depending on consultation with the Regional Planning Commission, that process could take a couple of years for design and permitting.
And do you have any idea what the ultimate price of the project when it's completed will be, a general range?
I mean, we don't at this point until we get into design. Obviously, we looked at this years back when we started to look at this initially. I don't want to throw a number out there that I'm going to be quoted for, but at that time it was somewhere in the vicinity of maybe $1 million. But that could go up based on obviously costs, et cetera, but until we get into design, we won't know that.
Other questions from FinCom? Yes, Howard.
Just a quick one. Any of the stone walls gonna have to come down?
So that's something obviously that was very prominent with the residents throughout this process. There's obviously a need to be able to shift those walls. We want to preserve that aesthetic value. Again, we really won't be able until we get in to do all the survey and design. Can't tell you exactly what will be affected, but at the same time, you can't look at that road and say that there will be some alterations to those walls, and replicating what is there is our goal if we need to.
Questions or comments from residents? Yes, sir. If you could please state your name and where you live.
I live at 299 Cottage Tree Street, but I own extensive property on Gay Street, 590, 572, well over a quarter mile of frontage. Just added perspective on the one thing that Mike said, which is, I think, in fact, not true. I don't think there are any kids north of Buckboard who go to Sheehan. There's no kids north of there who are now walking down Gay Street or have the opportunity to walk down Gay Street to go to school. So that's not accurate. That should be changed in the record. From a long history in town, just because the government money's available doesn't mean we should spend it. I mean, the number of times that, when I first moved here in the 70s, the state said 109 is a problem. Okay, so they came up with 209, and 209 was going to be a super highway down the Charles River watershed from 128 to 495. That probably would have been a mistake. The other thing that was available was something that improved, quote, unsafe intersections. And at one stage, Manhattan Street, Average Tree Street was an unsafe thing. Their recommendation was turning lanes, traffic lights, getting rid of all the stone walls, which have been there forever. But thank God Tom Dunn, who was on the Venice Selectmen, said, let's give it a chance. We'll put in four-way stop signs. We'll work on the curbs. We'll make it like that. And since then, kids walk by their school, but there's been no, I don't think there's been any fatalities. There really hasn't been any accidents since that solution was there. And that corner is still a great corner for Westwood and makes the town special. But that would have been gone if the town would have voted to, quote, accept the free money. And we've got to be responsible for ourselves here. I walk down that road every day from my house on Average Tree Street to our property on Gay Street. Yeah, I mean, you gotta be walking against traffic. There are other people out there, but it's not unsafe. It's not any more unsafe than a whole lot of places in town, like Manhattan Street, with no sidewalks going towards Norwood. The priority for this is just misplaced. It's just misplaced. This is a special town. People wanted sidewalks. There weren't sidewalks when I moved here. I didn't expect there to be sidewalks. So why do we need sidewalks now? How well 1997 we became a town. This is just government overkill. I would urge the Finance Commission to vote against this. Not necessary, especially if it's going to cost us a lot of money for dubious benefits which haven't been proven. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Other questions or comments from residents? Yes, sir.
So I'm Lucius Hill. I live at 519 Gay Street. And I guess my thought on this project is that, you know, there are several neighborhoods in Westwood that have a real bucolic, sort of wide-open country feel. Gay Street is one of those. And I think these areas give Westwood a quality that distinguishes it from a totally built-out, dense suburb like Needham. And I think that we need, as we plan for Westwood, to be careful to preserve these environments that give the town that distinctive quality. If we put this sidewalk in, we're going to cut trees down, we're going to move stone walls. If you drive down the street, there's just no doubt about it. There's no place for this sidewalk, particularly in the segment between, say, Milk Street and Buckboard Lane. And, you know, once you're done, you have a big concrete slab, such as depicted in the picture. You've moved your stone walls, you've cut your trees down. It's going to compromise that lovely aesthetic that that neighborhood now embodies. And it should also be mentioned that those walls you're moving, those trees you're cutting down are in somebody's front yard. Why would we do all of this? Compromise the lovely feel of our town, move people's walls, cut down their trees. I don't think there's a bona fide safety issue here. I've lived on the street for 23 years. I'm not aware of any accidents involving pedestrians in the last 23 years. That's a long time. So I don't think the data is supportive of a safety issue here. I feel a little bit like Mr. McFarland. This feels like it's driven by the fact that the state's willing to contribute money to a public works project, but it's not the right project for Westwood or for Gay Street, in my opinion.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Biswas. I'm from 145 Gay Street. I'm a new resident. We moved here 3 years ago. I'm also not in favor of the sidewalk. A couple of points. First of all, the number of properties along Gay Street is quite limited. And I would be surprised each property has one child walking to the school, as it was mentioned. So by that fact, the number of individuals who would be benefited is quite limited, number one. Number two, people who are walking along Gay Street right now are either residents of Gay Street or walking around along that road to experience the natural beauty, which is like within 2.5 miles from the bustling Boston Providence Highway. And when you make a left, you come to a complete countryside. It's unbelievable. It's unparalleled. And number three, I am sorry to say that, you know, people walking by now, even without the sidewalk, which is already very limited in terms of how many people walk by, almost every other day I have trash in front of my property. Somebody throws a Starbucks cup, somebody will throw a cigarette. I even have photographic evidence, people throwing alcoholic beverage bottles. And not only in front of my property, along Gay Street this morning, I just went to drop my child to school. While coming by, I saw 3 properties in front of which trash was thrown. This is with limited people walking by, very limited people. And I seriously have concerns. Number one, people maintaining the cleanliness. Number two, that will also cause safety issues in terms of, you know, crime. Right now, I don't think twice to have, you know, my garage door open. Nobody's going to cause, you know, come into my property, or, you know, I don't have any concerns for that. But I will seriously have concerns if anybody can walk along the road unrestricted, especially at odd times. And also another aspect, during unfavorable weather, who is responsible for the cleanliness of the sidewalk? And if somebody falls in front of my property, then who's going to be responsible?
Thank you.
The answer to the last question is the town. It's a town sidewalk or a town way.
Could you hear that answer?
The answer to that question of responsibility, like all sidewalks in a public way, it's a town's responsibility and town's liability. And we would be maintaining it in the wintertime.
Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Robert Forrester, 346 Gay Street. We moved here 16 years ago, and part of the appeal was the more rural nature of the town, and particularly Gay Street is why we moved to that particular street. So I really echo what you're hearing this evening. It doesn't seem that there's a safety issue to us, and the rural nature is a really sort of heart of this town, so I think it'd be a great shame to change that. So I'd really urge the committee to vote against this.
Yes, ma'am.
My name's Ron Campbell. I live at 1189 High Street, which has nothing to do with this. But my question was, would the town plow these sidewalks the way they do? So something to consider, they plow our sidewalks and dig up our lawn every year with the plow because it's too big. So they don't use the right equipment. Something for the town to think about when you're trying to sell this. These are, they use the wrong equipment. They're not using the right tools. So every year we reseed our lawn after they finish digging it up. We've even asked them, down by the sort of headed towards Walpole end, which if you've been down there lately, it doesn't look too hot now because of some of our neighbors. But nobody lets their kid walk to school. Nobody does that in this town, so I agree. This project is unnecessary.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Melanie Kane. I live at 59 Meadowbrook. So this is related, but not directly. So I was really excited about hearing more about this because I live off of Clapboard Tree, right where there's the sharp bend and where the shed is. And I have 2 little boys, and I was really excited about Westwood Day, and I was like, oh, if only we had a sidewalk. We could have walked. But we drove 90 seconds, then parked like on French Street off of there, and actually, I think it took longer to do that than if we just had a sidewalk and could walk. So I completely understand the visual aesthetics, and I too moved here because I loved the look and the feel and the rock walls and all of that. But I really, having young kids and hoping that they could walk to school and that I could walk them on their strollers or the wagons is a huge plus. And one of the reasons I also moved here is because of the awesome school systems and really strong, and there's so many children in this school system. And because the neighborhoods are so segregated, at least where we are, I met a woman, I joined the Westwood Young Women's Club, and we live, a hop, skip, and a jump. And we'd never met. And so I completely understand what you're saying, and I'm just acting as the 10th man here and dissenting. But one question I did have is if there's part of the master plan to, down the road, include Clapboard Tree, assuming this passes. If that is part of the master project of the Complete Streets program.
I can tell you that there are a lot more constraints with respect to Clapboard Tree than there are Gay Street. So, is it something that we've considered? Yes. Feasibility is another thing that we'd have to look at, quite honestly.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Bob Rich. I live at 34 York Way. I'm also a member of the Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Committee, although I'm not speaking on their behalf tonight. First, I'd like to thank Todd Korchin, head of the DPW, for continually thinking of ways to promote more walking and bicycling in town and getting this proposal up to this point. Westwood is the only town in the Commonwealth to receive 2 rounds of complete street funding to pay for sidewalk and road improvements in other parts of the town, and that is a tribute to Todd and his department. Second, I would like to say that I don't live on Gay Street and my property will not be affected by this proposal. I'm sympathetic to those who do live on Gay Street who will be affected, and I'm hoping that if sidewalks are eventually installed on Gay Street, that it can be done to everyone's satisfaction, especially those who live there. I'd like to speak in favor of the Gay Street proposal for the following 3 reasons. Number 1 is health. I hate to say this, but America is the fattest, laziest population on the planet. 40% of women and 35% of men in the U.S. are obese. 30 million Americans have diabetes and another 80 million are pre-diabetic, which means they're on their way. This is primarily due to 2 reasons: eating too many processed carbs and sugars and not getting enough physical activity due to too much sitting. Having a sidewalk on Gay Street would help encourage more residents to get outdoors for fresh air and sunshine and to be more physically active. Second, social connection. We are living in an increasingly isolated world. Studies have shown that increased connections with others not only make us happier, they make us physically healthier as well. It's my hope that this proposal will mean that more Westwood residents will have more opportunities to interact and get to know one another. And third is economics. Studies have shown that when walking and bicycling opportunities increase, business increases. I can easily see Islington and Westwood residents walking along Gay Street to shop and eat on the other side of town. This will be a benefit for local businesses and will help to unite the town by increasing the feeling of community. America is a very car-centric society. Unlike many other parts of the world, our infrastructure does not allow for many opportunities to safely walk and bicycle to different destinations. People feel they have to get into a car every time they want to run errands or shuttle children to various activities. This sidewalk project will offer an alternative, healthier mode of transportation for many Westwood residents. Ever since I've joined the Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Committee, I've noticed how many Westwood residents have to walk and run in streets, with cars passing dangerously close to them. Many cars are driven with distracted drivers who are more interested in looking at their phones than the road. Having more opportunities such as the Gay Street sidewalk to promote walking and running would benefit our residents in many ways, which is why I'm supporting this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, hand in the back.
Hi, my name is Ken Foscaldo, and I'm from 35 Norfolk Ave. I did attend the DPW's hearing back in June, and I'm not sure if a few of the items that were presented at that meeting are known tonight. One of them being that a lot of the stone walls, or some of the stone walls along Gay Street, are actually in-town right-of-way property, and that the DPW intends to move them back if necessary and rebuild them the way they are now. The other thing is, this is just a proposal for a study. Shouldn't we gather as much information as possible to have it to look at what we need to go forward with this proposal, if we're going to go forward with it all? So I would support this article.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this article? Seeing none, thank you very much to all who spoke on this. Thank you very much. The next article is the Arc of South Norfolk grant of easement.
Yes. So the Arc of South Norfolk approached the Board of Selectmen a couple months ago. They have a desire, and there'll be a design plan on your screen. They have a desire to put a sidewalk completely around the building for their clients, their patients. Excuse me. Yeah. Okay. So the building's in the middle and the sidewalks right there, and right there is where they need the easement. If you'll notice, most of the sidewalk is on their property. However, on the south side of the building and right there where it crosses over into Norwood is where they need an easement. That's a sewer easement that exists, and the sidewalk would go to connect the parking that exists on the Norwood side in the industrial park. And those are all planters that will be maintained by the clients of the ARC facility, and so that sidewalk will provide access. The board has granted them a right to install the sidewalk, but they'd like to have it under an easement, which provides some assurity of having the sidewalk.
Is anyone opposing this, to your knowledge, Mike?
To our knowledge, no one has appeared to oppose it, no.
Questions or comments from FinCom? Seeing none, questions or comments from residents on this article? I do not see any.
The next issue is street acceptance of Thompson Avenue. Thompson Avenue is an L-shaped roadway off of Winter Street, which was been purchased by a local developer and developed into residential properties. Most of the properties have now been constructed or are in the process of being constructed. There are 2 properties remaining. One is just at the foundation level that was recently poured, and there's a second parcel that has not yet been sold to someone to build a home on. The street has been constructed to the town standard. There were 4 items when it was under planning board review just recently that the planning board needed to condition the roadway, their approval on. Those have all now been met. So they appeared before the Board of Selectmen last night. The only condition that would remain, that would require of the developer or the builders or builder, would be to put a bond on when a building permit is issued in the event that in the construction of the property, for instance, putting in a foundation and cement trucks, that some damage would be done to the roadway and or sidewalk. And that bond would ensure that there were funds available to make the repairs necessary to any damage that might be done. This has been done in the past with other roadways when they haven't been fully constructed, but the road has been in an acceptable standard for the town to accept it. So it's not a new condition or a new issue for us.
Questions from FinCom? Questions or comments from residents on this article? I do not see any, so I think we can proceed to the next article from our town finance director.
Pam Jukbin, 57 Sexton Ave. I'm the finance director for the town. I have the next 2 articles, and they're both accounting housekeeping items. We're just looking to clean up and update how we maintain the bookkeeping for a couple of accounts. They're not presenting anything new or changing the intent from things we already currently do. The first one deals with the meals and hotel tax revenue. So this article would ask the town to establish under Chapter 40, Section 5B, an account to hold and reserve the meals and hotel tax revenue, direct the money coming in from those sources into that account, and then requires future town meeting vote in order to use the money. So this is just the accounting to hold the funds. Future town meeting decides how to utilize the money. And I just want to show you, these are the votes from the previous town meetings on both the meals and the hotel tax. The meals in 2014, the hotel 2016. The underlined portion indicates that at that time, the town voted to direct all collections of the revenue to be reserved in a separate fund and appropriated at a later town meeting date. This came up with the Department of Revenue during part of our normal annual year-end process. They have indicated that they would like to see the town set up this account under the Chapter 40, Section 5B. They saw the intent of both articles at the previous town meetings, but have indicated that we need to set it up under this other section if we want to have those accounts in place. So again, the intent has not changed from what previous town meeting has done. This would do the same thing under a different account. And if we did not move towards this different structure, Department of Revenue would require us to close out the account that we currently have in place.
Questions from FinCom? Pam, I have a question. So the meals and the hotel taxes will be put into this one account?
They would both be in the one account.
And so how will we be, I assume you'll be tracking what portion is coming in meals and what portion is coming in from hotels, and where will we see that, just as a
Yes. So
member
we
of the public?
have different revenue accounts for both of those. We do report that out every year. We do include that in the town meeting book that goes out to everyone, showing how much we're taking in and what is the balance in the account to date. And then it would require, to utilize that money, it requires a 2/3 town meeting vote when we go to apply that to something in the budget.
Questions or comments from residents on this article? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious, what's the rationale for having this be in a separate account as opposed to going to the general fund? Is there a specific purpose that this money was supposed to be restricted for? I'm just curious. I don't
Sure.
quite understand why it's not a general fund type
Yep.
of.
When the town in 2014 was really at the start of the University Station project, the town thought it was appropriate to adopt that local option meals tax. Our residents were paying that tax at other restaurants in surrounding areas. So the meals tax is 6.25%, and then the local option is 0.75% on your meals bill. The town felt that since we didn't know what kind of revenue that might be, and because that revenue might fluctuate, we did not want to apply it to kind of ongoing regular budget or have it go into the general fund. So we set up, as most towns did who adopted this local option, we set it up to be restricted into a separate account so that we could better use it for something. Such as capital or such as special projects, that we could kind of control that fluctuation, not have it just flow into the regular operating budget, but try to use it for something as a new revenue source.
Any other questions or comments from residents on this article? Seeing none, Pam, I think we can move to your second housekeeping
Great,
article.
okay. And the next article, similar in that it's just really revising at Department of Revenue's request, an accounting process that we already have in place. And this deals with a reserve account for special education funds. And this would ask the town to vote to accept under Mass General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 13E, to establish a reserve fund to handle special education costs, to direct some Medicaid reimbursements that are received by the school district into the fund. And then this asks to appropriate some funds we currently have on hand into the account. So Westwood, as other school district, does receive some Medicaid reimbursement for special education services that the school provides to students. We and other towns already had an account in place where we kind of directed the Medicaid revenue and then paid some of the special education bills from that account. Again, as part of our year-end review process, Department of Revenue has indicated that to have a special ed reserve account set up, it needs to be under the Chapter 40, Section 13E. So they asked us to establish that account. The school committee has to vote to accept that account, and they did that at a previous school committee meeting. And this account that we currently have in place, Department of Revenue did close out as part of our year-end process. And that's why for this one, you're seeing the request to direct $576,000 from free cash into the account. That was money that we already had on hand. So we're not appropriating anything different. That was kind of in the special reserve account that we already had. It was closed out as part of our free cash certification process, and so we would just be taking that and putting it into the special ed reserve account. And then for this account, it's not town meeting action to use the money going forward. It does take a vote, though, of the school committee and the Board of Selectmen when the schools want to use some of this money for special education bills.
Thank you, Pam. Questions? Barb?
Was this formerly a revolving account?
It was
that
a revolving
It
account.
was under control of the school committee. So at what point had it gone over to the town to be running the Medicaid? It had been run by the school committee.
It was always a school committee account, and then just when the DOR closed it out this June.
Okay.
It's a school committee revolving.
And are there restrictions on its use for special ed? we get the reimbursement, but was there restrictions by the school department on where, could it be at the
In the
discretion?
past?
Yes.
It was just for special education costs.
Okay.
Yep. And the Chapter 40, Section 13E was newly set up by Department of Revenue as part of that Municipal Modernization Act in 2016. They're really just trying to standardize how communities, do their bookkeeping for different things. So they were like, if you want to have this reserve account and put funds into it, it has to be under this section versus what we already had in place.
Other questions from FinCom? Questions or comments from residents on this article? I don't see any. Thank you
Good,
very
thank
much,
you. We
Pam.
try to limit the accounting type cleanups because I know it's confusing, but we really need to do both of these just to get these kind of correct and on target with what Department of Revenue would like. Thank you.
Very much, Pam. So the next article we have before us tonight is one that is being jointly sponsored by the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board, a zoning amendment to limit the number of residential dwelling units in FMUOD 6 and FMUOD 7. And here to present on this is Nora Locknane,
Yes.
our Economic Development Director. Welcome.
Thank you. So the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board are jointly sponsoring this article, and the purpose of the article is clarification. It's not intended to reduce the number of residential uses that are currently allowed in FMUOD 6, which is Washington Street, and FMUOD 7, which is High Street. That section of the bylaw will remain with a 50% limit on the percentage of floor area that could be devoted to residential uses. But this adds over and above that a unit cap for each of those districts. 90 is the recommended cap, and that's how the article has been put forward. I was here at a previous meeting where we just discussed where the article came from and how we came to the 90 number. So I'll just review that. We had heard at various Islington Center Task Force meetings, at selectmen meetings, that there were people who were concerned that the current bylaw would allow a significant number of housing units on Washington Street and on High Street. I think at one meeting, someone stated that they thought they could see 600 or 700 housing units on Washington Street from this bylaw. I tried to explain then that that's not the case, that a 50% limit on a project area's floor area is a very limiting factor, that there's a height limit on buildings, there are parking requirements, there are a lot of concerns that go into developing a parcel, and a 50% cap is a significant cap. So I took a look at all the different parcels first in Washington Street and then in High Street that would possibly be available for development. And I looked at it from, I guess, an overdevelopment point of view, looking at the maximum impervious surface, the minimum amount of parking spaces, no landscaping, no public amenities, just stripping it down and overdeveloping every parcel there to come up with what would be the maximum number that would be possible, and combining all of the lots that were contiguous to each other that are currently in separate ownership. Going through that exercise, I came up with a number of up to 149 units that could be developed on the Washington Street area and up to 119 that could be developed on the High Street area. I think those numbers are the maximum possible under conditions that I can't ever imagine this planning board or any planning board ever allowing, and I doubt that any property owner would actually be looking to develop in that manner. I think a lower number is much more realistic. And I settled on the number of 90, which I think is much more in line with what could actually happen on both sides of town. I'll point out that the 149 reducing to 90 on Washington Street may seem odd, where 119 reduces to 90 on the High Street area. The reason is the two FMUOD, flexible multiple use overlay districts, really are very different. The one here on High Street right out the door contains larger parcels that are in single ownership, and the FMUOD district on Washington Street contains smaller parcels, greater number of smaller parcels in individual ownership, separate from each other. And it also includes one very large parcel, Roach Brothers, that I don't think is a likely candidate for redevelopment. So the 90 number that I've recommended to the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board represents a fair estimate of what could actually be proposed for development right now in front of the planning board that would be considered realistic. So going back, the purpose of the bylaw that's being proposed is not to further reduce the cap that the 50% of floor area requirement that's in the bylaw already requires. It's to clarify and make it clear to residents that you cannot put 600 or 700 housing units on Washington Street. It's not a possibility under the existing bylaw, and it clearly would not be a possibility if we instituted this change.
Thank you very much. Questions from FinCom? Yeah, Peter.
I just wanted to clarify, I think I heard this right previously, but I just want to clarify that the existing units are part of that 90 cap.
Yes, they are. And in fact, since I last spoke to you, the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board adjusted the language of the article to specify that the 90 units on the Washington Street side includes the 12 existing units that were created in the 301, 323 project on Washington Street, and it would also include the units right next door here in the Colburn School Building on the High Street side. So the bylaw is very specific to include that. The maximum shall include all residential dwelling units previously approved by FMUOD special permit or upper story residential overlay district special permit, which is how Colburn School was approved.
Other questions from FinCom? Yeah, Judy.
Can I just ask a clarifying question so I make sure I'm getting this right? Are you saying that each parcel has a limitation or each development of 50? Okay.
Yes, yeah, the rest of the FMUOD bylaw has very specific requirements on residential units in any development, and it limits it in these two districts to no more than 50% of floor area.
Okay, thanks.
Questions or comments from residents on this article? Yes, sir.
Joe Layden from 136 School Street. Joe Layden from 136 School Street. The language specifies apartments built under special permits. Is there any other way of an owner constructing an apartment within that area without using the special permit process?
There is not. There are some apartments that are in residential districts along that area. Those would not be taken into account. But you could not create a residential unit within the FMUOD district, which overlies the commercial zones, except for through FMUOD special permit or USROD, upper story residential overlay district, in the case of High Street. There's a limited area here that could have apartments through the USROD, and we capture those, saying that existing ones would be limited.
Other questions or comments from residents? Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Nada Milosavljevic, Fabrizio, 32 Webster Street. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I think 90 dwelling units per district is too many. I think I echo the sentiments of the residents. And at town meeting, I understand 2/3 of a vote was for residential development. But when you look at the surveys that the town sent out, I believe it was in 2012, the people that took the time to respond to those surveys were strongly opposed to residential development. And that's just my comment. 90 is way too much for each district.
Any other questions or comments on this article? I don't see any. Oh,
Can I
Barb?
just ask, so you're saying 90, potentially, you didn't go through the detail, so it could be more than 90. But what you're saying is, no, if we didn't have this in place, it could be more than 90.
I think if we didn't have this in place, it's theoretically possible you could get up to 149 in Washington Street and up to 119 in High Street.
So what you're doing, the purpose of this is to limit it, even if they came forward and could fit in 110, we're saying 90 is going to be.
That would be the effect of this, that it would limit it to no more than 90. I don't think that's a truly placing a limit on what you could do, though, because keep in mind that the FMUOD has to go through the planning board, and the planning board has to issue a special permit. So I don't think by setting it 90, we're taking away any property owner's rights to develop apartments. But I think what we're doing by putting in this language that limits it to 90 is we're giving people the comfort of knowing that there's nothing we could do to increase the number of apartments above 90. The planning board, once they hit that 90th unit, could not issue another special permit.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Claire Galkowski, 320 Dover Road. Just a question, where did the number 90 come from for each district, and why are they not proportional based on what's theoretically possible? For instance, why is it not less for High Street?
Because the numbers 149 and 119 were what is theoretically possible, but I don't think they're realistic. I think if we were to set the limits at 149 and 119, 149 for Washington Street and 119, we would be putting in limits that are over and above what we would ever see. So I just looked at 90 as something that I thought was a much more realistic number. For instance, if you look at Washington Street, of those 149 units, I believe either 63 or 64 of them would be units on the Roach Brothers property. So I think you can absolutely take those off the top. I don't think that's going to happen. Would Roach Brothers at some point give off a piece of its land to be combined with those other properties in the south end of Washington Street and develop some type of a housing complex, a mixed-use property down there that could use some of the Roach Brothers? I think that could happen. I think that's a more realistic expectation than thinking that the entire Roach Brothers parcel and every piece of property from Roach Brothers down to the railroad trestle would be redeveloped in a single large building. I don't think that's likely at all, and I can't imagine the planning board ever granting a special permit and not requiring the type of public amenities that would further erode the land that's available for residential development. So I came up with the 90 as something that I think is more realistic. The theoretical numbers were 149 and 119, but looking not just at the physical size of the property, but looking at the topography, looking at the proximity to housing developments that are around there, looking at the type of landscaping that the planning board ordinarily requires on projects, whether they're commercial or mixed use. I think that the 90 is just a more accurate number for both the zones. So I think you could invite an engineer in here to combine all the parcels in different ways and produce single buildings or multiple buildings on all the properties that are available, and you could come up with other numbers. I don't think any of them would go higher than the 149 and 119. They could, in theory, go to 100 or 90. I don't think you'd get less than 90, and I don't think you'd get more than 149 on Washington Street. So that's how I came up with the numbers. I did not see this article as an intentional limit on the number of units that could be developed beyond what's already limited in the bylaw. I saw it as a way of giving clarification so that people would understand what the bylaw was attempting to do.
Any other questions?
Sorry, can I ask one more question? So will we end up in a scenario where, and I don't know if this is right or not, but that 75 apartments get developed in this Islington Center, right? So 75 out of 90 are gone. 5 years from now, that scenario in Roach Brothers plays out, and they want to join lots and put 60 more on, but they can't because there's only 15 left.
That's
Then what do we
exactly.
do?
So then you would, if Roach Brothers or the future owner of that had a project that the town was interested in pursuing, they could go back to town meeting with a zoning article to increase that cap. That would require a 2/3 vote. If you had a project that was so beneficial to the town that you'd want to increase that cap, I would imagine town meeting would vote for it.
So it'd go back.
And in the same manner, in a future, if say there were 50 units that were approved on Washington Street and maybe another 40 on High Street, and residents decided that that was all that needed to be there, they could again go in and amend the zoning bylaw with an article. So this is set. If this article is approved, the 90 would be set in place until such time as another article was proposed and approved by 2/3 vote.
Anything else on this?
Where are the units on High Street potentially? I keep flipping past that one.
I think you can go back. There's a map that shows the High Street FMUOD district. So it essentially covers the Good Plaza, the Stagecoach Plaza, and then the land on the opposite side of High Street between the, from on this side of the street from the Keller Williams building and then crossing over Gay Street to the lot that runs from Coldwell Banker through I believe that's up until the Starbucks building.
very much, Nora. I think we can move on to the 3 planning board articles. Abby, we have Abby McCabe, our town planner. Thank you very much to the Board of Selectmen. Gillette, thank you. So we welcome Abby McCabe, our town planner, Trevor Lovenstein, chair of the planning board. Welcome. You have 3 articles.
Thank you.
Additional articles before us tonight.
Yes. Also, I wanted to say that we have other planning board members, Dave Atkins, Mike McCusker, and I think Brian Gorman is here, and Steve Olenoff, is he here? No, not yet. This article proposes a change to our accessory use table by amending the zoning to allow accessory uses such as the retail sales for cafeterias, snack bars, vending machines, those types of accessory uses that are interior to a building with no exterior advertising, that are intended primarily for employees. The zoning proposes changing the zoning to allow it in the highway business district zone. Presently, these uses are only allowed in our industrial, in our administrative ARO, administrative office zones, which are, that's the area on Louderbrook Drive where Meditech is, are off of East Street, and then around Canton and University Ave. All right, so up here on the map, this article would change to allow these uses such as cafeterias and the intended for employees to be allowed accessory use in the highway business zone, which is the areas around Route 1 near the Glacier Drive, Wilson Way area. The planning board decided to pursue this article at the request of a property owner on Wilson Way, which is behind Frugal Fanny's. There's an office building that he's marketing, and brought to the planning board's attention that these cafeteria uses are not allowed. And he thought that would be important to market his building. So the planning board has proposed this article to, since this is important to maintain and attract commercial uses to this area, proposing the zoning change.
Questions from FinCom? Is anyone opposing this, to your knowledge?
Not that we've heard. We had a the planning board had a public hearing on October 3rd, and these articles have been forwarded with the comments that we heard. And the only change we made since the last time we here was to add that language to the last article. But we didn't hear any comments about this article.
We did hear from Pam Dukeman since our last meeting that the cafeterias would be subject to the meals tax that
Yes.
we discussed earlier tonight. Questions or comments from residents on this article? Oh, sorry, Mr. McManus.
51 Millbrook Road. I'd just like to know, can we get the identity of the property owner who's requesting this?
It was the owner for 80 Wilson Way. I think it's Fairview Properties. Mr. Gill, he might be here. I don't know. Oh,
Please, sir. Thank you, sir. Any other questions or comments on this article? I don't see any, so I think we can move on to your next article. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
all right. Our next article proposes changes to our medical uses. We recently realized that we had definitions that weren't shown in our table of uses, and some parts of the bylaw reference these uses that weren't defined. So we're updating our definitions. We're clarifying our medical centers and clinics definition, and then adding definitions for hospitals and substance rehabilitation and treatment centers. Those are new definitions that are being added, and then we're updating the table uses to show where they are and where they're not allowed. The major change here is the hospital and treatment facility where that would give care to overnight stays. Those are proposed to be allowed only by special permit in the Administrative Research Office zone.
Any questions from FinCom members on this?
That does not change the zoning for where Westwood Lodge has been?
Nope, that's in a residential zone, so that would continue as a pre-existing non-conforming use.
Any questions or comments from residents on this article? I do not see any, so I think we can move on to your next article. Thank you.
And then the last article is a housekeeping article that's really correcting errors that we discovered while we were reviewing the bylaw. Really, we noticed there was something missing in the table of contents about one of the overlay districts, and then some incorrect references with wrong section numbers that have changed over time that need to be updated, and then an old section of the bylaw is being deleted because it no longer exists.
Questions from members? Questions or comments from residents on this? Do not see any. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Thank you for your work. That leads us to the town clerk, Dottie Powers. Is Dottie here? Yes. Oh, there you are. Welcome. You have 2 articles before us tonight.
Yes, I do. The first article that I'm proposing is a change in our bylaws. It's to see if the town will vote to amend our town bylaws, Chapter 184, Section 10, the licensing of dogs. The change would be effective January 1st, 2018. Any person 70 years of age or older, upon proof of age, shall be exempt from the annual fee for 1 dog per household per year. The owner of a kennel license aged 70 years or older shall be excluded from this exemption. Dogs will still need to be licensed on or before March 31st of any given year per town bylaws.
This is, I think, the 3rd time you've been before us this fall on this article. Any questions from FinCom? Any questions or comments from residents on this article? Don't see any, so I think we're safe to proceed with your next article.
Okay, thank you. So the second article that I am proposing is this has to do with voter registration sessions, and this is to see if the town will vote to accept Chapter 41 of Section 110A of the Mass General Laws. And what this is any public office in any city or town may remain closed on any or all Saturdays, as may be determined from time to time, in a city by the city council, subject to provisions of the city charter, or in a town by vote of the town at a special or regular town meeting, and the provisions of Section 9 of Chapter 4 shall apply in the case of such closing of any such office on any Saturday to the same extent as if such Saturday were a legal holiday. So basically, this is very rare that it would happen, and it would really be if there was an election, maybe there would be a special election, and the election would fall on a Friday. You'd revert back to 20 days, and most likely that would be a Saturday. So our last day for voter registration would be Friday. It would be the town, we close at 1 on Fridays, but we'd have to stay open until 8 p.m. And people can register online or through mail with a postmark up until 11:59 p.m. And on the other hand, if somebody was bringing initiative petitions in, and that would revert a day later. So that would go to the first business day following. And we would be open until 5 o'clock that day to accept any petitions. So basically, it's really, it's a money saver for the town to have to open all those hours on a Saturday. And to be quite honest with you, now, because there's so many avenues to register to vote, people do it online. they do it by mail. So even a normal voter registration we have, we might see 1 or 2 people now, if that.
Questions from members? Questions or comments from residents on this article?
Johnny, I thought you said in an earlier meeting, but there'd be ways to communicate that that would be the deadline, so it'd be clear. Maybe people that had waited till Saturday in the past would now know that Friday's the deadline.
Oh,
correct?
absolutely.
Yeah.
That would have to be advertised. It would be on our website. I always do press releases in all our local newspapers and on WestCat as well. So the information would be out there.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This leads us to our petitioner articles, the first of which is a petition by Mr. Barrett. Welcome, if you would please identify yourself and where you live.
I am Steve Barrett from 230 School Street. This is my first time, so please be gentle.
Please take your time, Mr. Barrett. Welcome.
I kind of wanted to set the background for my concern. Last spring, we had a town meeting that featured 4 articles that were raised that addressed issues of zoning in principally in Washington Street, but that also apply to High Street as well. Those 4 articles were all, as zoning articles, required to be passed by a 2/3 majority in order to take effect. None of them passed the 2/3 threshold, but all of them passed the 50% threshold, which meant that nothing was reversed, nothing was changed. But what was evident by surpassing the 50% threshold on all of those articles was that the residents of the town of Westwood are at odds with what the selectmen and the planning board seem to be wanting us to do. We need to resolve that tension, and we need to resolve that difference. And it's got to be done in the plain light of day, and that's part of my intention here. I want to go to, do we have our slides? Okay. Just talk amongst yourselves. There we go. Perhaps we'll sing a song. The article that we're in question, the first couple of slides just really go to identifying what it is we're talking about. The item first appeared in the mailed out warrant as item 7, amendments to project area in the FMUOD. This is in the 2016 warrant for the 2016 town meeting. It first appeared as item 7 in the mail out, in the handout at town meeting. Oh, okay, I'm going to sign in. There we go. Not giving any passwords here. Yeah, it does. So you used all asterisks. That's good. Okay, there we go. There's the title page. And we can go, oh, does this now let me go to the next slide?
Probably not. Okay, I can stand here.
Okay, yeah, if you can go to the next one. That is what appeared in your mail-out warrant. The next slide will show you what we were all handed at town meeting. Now, in this case, it's Article 28, amendments to project area in the FMUOD 1. Note that it says in the FMUOD 1. The next slide is the final tally of the votes. By the time it got to the final tally, it had become item 29. Not item 28, which is housekeeping amendments, but item 29, amendments to project area in the FMUOD 1. No mention of any other FMUOD areas. And the next slide should bring this up before you play this. What happened is that somehow this was all done at the very last minute. And at the last minute, inserted in this article, this was intended as an article and presented and described at every stage in this very last minute process as a part of a settlement regarding the University Station and Westwood Station projects that had to be ironed out at the last minute, hammer and tongs, under great pressure, and was rushed into the room at the last minute. Here, you've got to pass this in order for the University Station project to go forward. But buried in this was a whole list of stuff affecting every other FMUOD in the town. It was never described. It was never, as to my knowledge, brought up before any planning board meeting, before any FinCom meeting, before any zoning board meeting. There was never any advance warning, to my knowledge, to the residents of the town that this significant change to zoning was going to occur. So no one had any opportunity to research this change or to raise any objections to it. It was just there, and we were presented sort of with a metaphorical gun to our heads. You got to pass this now because the station project has to go forward. After the dust settled, I believe this is Nora's comment at June's town meeting when she was talking about this issue when we brought it up in the motion. Can play it now.
Audio? Switch on the screen maybe, or? Sorry.
I will move on and let you vote. This copy of the article that was proposed in 2016. The first portion of this article was advertised. It was brought to the Finance Commission as early as December 2015. It was advertised in January 2016. Hearings were held before the Planning Board in February 2016 and March 2016. At all of those stages, the article consisted only of the first section, the section that called for changing FMUOD 1 project area from 30 acres to 10 acres. This article was introduced in that format because that's what was being discussed in the settlement talks I mentioned earlier for the University Avenue property. That's how the article was written, that's how it was advertised, that's how it was discussed in the hearing. It was at the last minute, before that hearing resulted in a final recommendation to town meeting, that our special counsel came back and said in our settlement agreements they asked for one more thing. They asked for not just changing the project area from 30 to 10 acres, but also adding this footnote. They asked the planning board, would you please do that so we could settle the suit in the town's favor? The planning board agreed to do that. They added part 2, which is affecting the minimum project area with that footnote. As I said earlier, had we had more time to discuss it and fully vet it, we probably would have said no. We would have done without the footnote.
Thank you. If we had had time to consider it, to look at it in the light of day, we probably would not have done it. People never had a chance to vet this, to look at it, to examine it. It was just shoved in there. This is the copy that we've been able to obtain of the settlement agreement, a description of the settlement agreement. And if you read it closely, you'll find no mention of anything in any multi-use zone other than Zone 1. It affects the reduction from 30 acres to 10 acres in Zone 1. There is no involvement of High Street. There is no involvement of Washington Street, and I can't conceive of any connection that there would be to those other multi-use districts as part of the settlement. So this whole extension of what the specific issue that we're talking about is allowing the use of adjoining properties to make up for zoning requirements. which is how, that's the way that you ended up with the new building that we've got across from Roach's now, that has this kind of quality about it, where when you look at it, it sort of looks like the building's actually larger than the land it sits on. That's how they did that. They used adjacent properties, and they used, by this piece of legerdemain, that was never examined by the people. We want a chance to have the people discuss it. And I think the selectmen, I'm guessing, actually want a chance to rectify this process. And I know there's a lot riding on this. There's a lot of money involved in this. And I'm honestly, a little personally afraid of taking on the process, because I know there's substantial opposition to this from powerful people. And I have a little personal fear about it. And I think a lot of other people do too. I think we need to put the light of day on this subject and let it be opened up and rediscussed. Give the selectmen an opportunity to A, reconsider what it is that they actually want for this zoning, without the pressure of that immediate pressure that Nora talked about, and to B, then present that to the people, to the residents of the town, and justify it and explain it to us, and get our support for it, or not get our support for it, as the case may be. But what I'm concerned about here really is, my nightmare is that a whole bunch of stuff gets built on this foundation of this stuff that's been passed. Everything that's built on that is built on sand. If you build a house and you find a location you love, and you go and you build a foundation, and you get the carpenters there and the timber and everything, and you're all ready to do the framing, and somebody comes along and says, hey, excuse me, you're building on sand. Do you then say, oh, but I got the carpenters here and everything is, it must be solid ground because I've got big plans for this. The farther you go with it, the bigger your liability is, the more your exposure is. Any attorneys here? Oh, I'm not an attorney, but I watch a lot of TV. Okay? I think the farther we go down this road on this foundation, the more we're extending our liability and our exposure as a town. And personally, I know if we get sued, the cost of litigation and the cost of any settlement isn't going to be paid by selectmen or planning board or FinCom to any extent other than their residency. It's going to be paid by the residents, because the residents own the town. So the residents are responsible for the decisions that are made. If the residents are responsible and accountable for the decisions that are made, shouldn't we be exposed to the process? Shouldn't we be an informed, considered part of the process? I really hope that at least some of the people on the FinCom will vote to support the people's involvement in a democratic process. This is town meeting government. It's the core and the soul of America. I'm sorry to be melodramatic, but I just read, what's his name? Who's the French guy? De Tocqueville, thank you. You went to school. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, sir. As part of our last meeting, we had your article at our last meeting. With respect to your article and others, it was discussed that the town would be seeking counsel from town council as to the legality of your and the other articles, which is very commonly done. And so that was done, and I do believe I saw town council, Tom McCusker, is here with us. So I'd like to, if I may, if we could hear from you, Mr. McCusker, relative to this article before the FinCom asks questions of Mr. Barrett.
Of course. The report I gave to the Finance Commission on the 4 petition articles was released this morning to the petitioners. With respect to the article before you, which is petition article number 4, it's not in proper form. It. I'm sorry.
This
Oh,
is-
and I'm talking about my memo.
Okay.
This is the one that seeks to rescind the vote on Article 29 at the 2016 town
Which
meeting.
is Mr. Barrett's article, so we're all on the same page. Thank you.
All of the points raised about the people having an opportunity to be heard and discuss the matter and work it out would be available to the petitioners had they moved to amend the zoning bylaw by deleting whatever section they wanted to delete. Then it would go through the normal process. The planning board would hold public hearings, notices would be published in the newspapers, and the planning board would make a decision and would have to make a recommendation to the town meeting. The article as presented is not a zoning article, and I don't believe any vote on it would, I think it would be a nullity, and I'm certain the Attorney General's office would not allow it.
Thank you, Mr. McCusker. Questions from FinCom members?
Mr. McCusker, in your memo, you stated whether it be a simple majority or two-thirds vote on some of the other articles. This article, you didn't state whether it be a simple majority or a two-thirds vote.
Well, frankly, I don't know. It's not a zoning article, but it would affect the zoning bylaw. So I would suspect that probably a majority vote would be sufficient if the town wanted to pass it.
Other questions from FinCom? Mike?
Mr. Barrett, did you participate in any of our hearings last year on this issue?
I was not available. I was not able to. I'm sorry. I have two parents who are aged and they couldn't be not able to devote the time that I'd like to.
No, I understand, and but I'm asked the question only because you suggest that we haven't talked about this substantively as a town. We talked about this extensively last year as a town here.
I'm talking about before the 2016 vote.
No, I get it, but I think you suggest that the town needs the opportunity to discuss it substantively. That's the underlying substantive request you have, correct?
Yes.
We talked about this extensively last year. It was debated substantively last year. For really, the first time I don't remember being debated substantively with regard to this UOD. Last year it was extensively. Was it not?
I can't speak to that. What I can speak to is the fact that we did achieve a 50% majority, and that undercuts the support for the plans that the town has at this point.
Mr. McCusker?
Yeah, I'd like to correct one of my statements. On reflection, although it's not a zoning article, it would affect zoning, it would repeal zoning, and I think it would require a two-thirds vote, not a majority.
Questions or comments from residents on this article?
Yes, I just have one. Debbie Cohen, Chester Ave. I'm still confused as to why there's a lot of confusion about how it's written. I'm not understanding council's explanation. If it's not a zoning, then what is, I mean, I don't know.
I'm trying to understand your question.
So bylaws and zoning need two-thirds vote. It's not a zoning, but it needs two-thirds vote, because it is zoning. So where does this fall, and why wouldn't it be considered an appropriately stated article?
Question for you, Mr. McCusker. Did you hear the question?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
So bylaw changes and zoning changes need two-thirds.
That's correct.
So it's not a zoning, but it is a zoning.
Well, it's not a zoning article as it's phrased, but it would affect the zoning bylaw.
Correct. So why wouldn't it be able to go forward as written?
Because you need a two-thirds vote to amend the zoning bylaw.
Correct. But if they got the two-thirds vote, it would pass.
The article might pass, yes, but I don't think it would be approved. Well, I've had discussions with the Attorney General's office, and while they don't give out advisory opinions on these matters, yeah, I have the sense that they would not approve it.
Ms. Conan, all questions
Oh, I'm
go
sorry.
through the chair.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand the process. I'm still trying to understand why they don't think it would be approved. I mean, it's a rescind, repeal.
Could you use the microphone more?
It's not working.
So I think,
It's working for the recording.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
so I think the question, just to clarify, Mr. McCusker, is perhaps you could explain why you believe the AG's office may not approve Mr. Barrett's article if it does pass at town meeting. Would you be able to clarify that a bit, sir?
Yes, I believe they would not approve it because it's not in proper form. It would amend the zoning bylaw without all of the requirements to amend the zoning bylaw. Public hearings, notifications in the papers, reports by the planning board. This is none of those. And I believe that's why I think the Attorney General would not approve it.
Other questions or comments? Chris?
Just to clarify, if this is rescinded, the vote, Article 29, would that also rescind the reduction of the minimum project area? So it's far-reaching, this article as it's written, not just the footnote. It would affect the other aspects of Article 29 as well.
The issue really needs to be addressed and redesigned, and I don't have the whole solution to that. But I want this addressed. I want it done. It's an open liability to the town. How it's addressed, it's got to be addressed.
Mike?
So I want to address a statement that was made and try to clear that up. There was an indication that the footnote was added at the last minute at the request of the landowner who we were having, were in litigation with about two takings that we had made of them in order to facilitate the improvements to University Avenue, and it affected his driveway access. We met with him, we talked to him about reducing the area from 30 acres to 10 acres. He had 11 acres on either side of the roadway. He was in agreement. However, he asked the question, can I combine these parcels that are separated by a roadway and have a railroad easement through them? We assured him that yes, you can, because that had been the practice of the planning board. He thought about it, accepted it at the meeting, however, subsequently came back to special counsel and said, you know, I just feel more comfortable if you put a footnote in the zoning bylaws so there was no question. It was clear that I would be entitled to combine these parcels that are divided by a roadway and one of which is divided by a railroad way. That is why we inserted the footnote in that article, but it was just restating a practice that existed in the town in each of these instances, and Nora can back me up on that.
So that practice applied across the board in planning board applications, whether it was for a residential development, a commercial development, by right development, special permit development. It is customary in Westwood and throughout the state for projects to combine parcels either across streets or next to each other. In fact, the FMUOD bylaw is written to define a project by project area, not just by lots. It gives you the project area, minimum project size, and then the minimum lot size. The assumption is that a project includes more than one lot. So combination of lots are just understood to have occurred. There have been many many approvals that the planning board had granted throughout the years that combined parcels that were not just next to each other, but were also across streets and across railroad rights of way. So when the settlement talks were going on, we said, oh, you can do that. The planning board does that all the time. But the lawyers decided that they wanted to request this extra language, and so it was inserted into the article. In that clip that was shown there, I did misstate. I was holding that night the articles from 2015. This board may remember that we first came with the university, the FMUOD 1 change from 30 acres down to 10 acres in 2015 at the town meeting. It was pulled at the last minute after a full hearing process. That article was just a reduction from 30 to 10, and it was pulled because the settlement agreement wasn't signed. Then it came back again in 2016. So that evening at town meeting, I had the 2015 documents before me, which only showed the 30 to 10 and didn't show that footnote being added. Subsequent to that, I went over with Abby and we pulled out all the documents from the 2016 hearing. And in fact, although the initial publication referenced FMUOD 1 and the 30 to 10 acre reduction, before the hearing, the language was added with the footnote. At the planning board public hearing, the language with the footnote was discussed. At the FinCom public hearing, the language with the footnote was discussed. At a Board of Selectmen meeting prior to that FinCom hearing, it was discussed. And then immediately prior to town meeting, the Board of Selectmen signed a settlement agreement subject to the town meeting vote that was to occur later that night. So it was discussed many times before then. In 2015, the footnote wasn't in there. In 2016, when the article came back, the request was to put the footnote in just to make the property owner comfortable that they could at some point come back for a FMUOD development that involved their land. The property owner owned a total of 11 acres separated by University Avenue, and one of those parcels actually had railroad tracks between sections of the parcel. So they just wanted to make sure that there would be no obstacles to them applying for an FMUOD district. I also want to point out that the article came before town meeting and was voted on in 2016. It had nothing to do with the University Station project. The University Station project was approved in May of 2013, a full 3 years before this. This was to clear up a takings that had occurred in 2007 for the Westwood Station project. So there wasn't pressure to get it done related to University Station. There was pressure to settle a lawsuit which could otherwise be at the expense of the town. And the settlement agreement was very clear. In the settlement agreement, the selectmen agreed to bring that article. The article had the two provisions, dropping the area from 30 acres to 10 acres and adding that footnote. And there's another section in that settlement agreement that says if that article did not pass, the settlement was null and void and the parties would resume their suit. So we proposed the article. We recommended that the FinCom support it. FinCom did. We recommended the town meeting approve it. Town meeting did, and that settled the case. I think there's a question that remains if we rescind that article, and if by some chance the Attorney General's office allows that, despite the fact that there's been no zoning hearing on it before the planning board, there's been no advertisement, it has not been treated as a zoning article. If nonetheless it gets approved at town meeting and approved by the Attorney General's office, then I believe we have a question about whether our agreement with that property owner is valid or whether we're heading back to court on that takings issue.
Other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
David Atkins, 85 Barker Street, speaking as myself, not the planning board necessarily, but I would focus on the impact of this. As Chris pointed out, this would be to rescind the entire Article 29, which is two parts. The first is the increase of area, or the decrease of area from 30 acres to 10 acres. I don't see how that's related to the concerns that the petitioner raised. I understand the concerns of the building a disproportionately sized building, combining parcels and all that. I thought that's what the point of the petition article was. But if you pass this, you also take out this other part. So I think that's one important point to observe. But the second point is just that the footnote itself, as I've understood this, it was a longstanding practice of the planning board to consider parcels. I've heard this at many of these public hearings, So I don't even see, if we were to take that footnote out, what is the impact? Like, it wouldn't cause the planning board to not be able to approve projects like they've approved in the past. I think that there was an attempt at the town meeting to make changes to the footnotes, and we went through a very long discussion about that. That was a more direct approach, as well as you could, as I think town council said, you could strike out the entire section of the bylaw, say we don't want FMUODs anymore. Those would be direct ways to, if you really wanted to do it, you could do that. But taking the footnote out, I just don't see what it would accomplish, even if I'm in favor of, even if I thought I want to clear things up. I think the only thing it would do is it would remove something that has annoyed people and has caused a lot of concern. But I don't think it changes anything. So am I wrong on that? I mean, I don't think taking the footnote out is not going to prevent combining parcels for the purpose of applying for a special permit under the FMUODs.
Thank you. Other questions or comments on this article? Yeah, Jim.
I guess to summarize, am I correct when you're talking about your practice, or the planning board's practice of joining contiguous lots, that was heard on a case-by-case basis, so it could have been declined, right?
In my experience, it never was declined.
But you had the option to decline it.
I think in order to decline it, there would have to be a prohibition in the bylaw that says you cannot combine parcels. So while the footnote made it clear that you could, I don't believe.
Does the footnote make it by right now?
No, the footnote is a footnote that just it explains that it's a permissible activity in that zone to combine parcels. It doesn't speak to any other section in the bylaw. It doesn't speak to the planning board's practice. There is still nothing in the bylaw that prohibits the combination of parcels for a larger project area. And if this footnote is removed, it doesn't insert that prohibition. That would require a zoning amendment to add a prohibition to disallow the planning board looking at combined parcels. And they could do that either just in the FMUOD district, or they could do it in multiple districts. In all cases, I'd advise against that, because I think good planning involves the ability to combine parcels where it's appropriate.
Any other questions or comments on this article? Seeing none, thank you very much, sir. The next two petitioner articles are from Ms. Rawlings. Ms. Rawlings, were you going to be presenting these together because they are related?
That makes sense.
I think so, too.
I just have the one presentation.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. So these, I believe, are labeled N and O on the handout folks have. So if you could please just state your name and where you live, please.
Sure.
When you're ready.
My name is Ellen Rawlings. I live at 86 Green Hill Road. And I will be presenting on the two articles that are related to adopting electronic voting for our town meetings. Just for folks who may not have had a chance to read the warrant, one of them is actually about adopting electronic voting and using it at town meeting, and the other one is just addressing the cost to purchase and or rent equipment. Before I dive into slides, I learned yesterday while watching the selectmen meeting that it sounds like we're interested in pursuing a pilot test of an electronic voting system at the fall town meeting, which is very encouraging and could work quite well, moving hand in hand with this article if people decide to move forward with it. The first question was, what would it cost to purchase the system? I talked to Turning Technologies. They are one of a handful of companies that offer equipment. Other towns like Wayland, I spoke to their town clerk. They actually put out an RFP and got proposals from 3 or 4 companies. So this is just one set of data. From what I've heard, Turning Technologies is one of the more used companies and competitive in their pricing. So I thought that would be a good one to present. For 200 units, it would be just about $10,020. Cost breakdown approximately $50 per unit. That includes the hand the response cards, the licenses to use them, the receivers and cases, and that's the complete system. It breaks down to about $50 per individual. If you up to 350 units, it's just under $17,000. That drops the price to about $48 per unit. I've heard there might be some interest in purchasing a larger number, more like 500. I don't have the numbers on that, but I hope that maybe there was even an extra break on the price if you go up. There was also some question about, okay, we own 500 units, but what if we're expecting a turnout of 2,000 people at a town meeting? So we inquired as to, if we decided to rent additional units, what would it cost us? The first 50 additional units would be $695, and then $4 for every unit thereafter, and that's all inclusive as well with all the other features. So it would be approximately $6,500 to rent an additional 1,500 units for a town meeting. And if you get in touch with Turning Technologies 3 weeks in advance, they ship and return for free. Another option that I didn't put on the slide, there are other communities using the same technology. We could have some sort of reciprocal agreement with them to share equipment to borrow and vice versa if they think they're having a big turnout for a town meeting. I think like Avon has 500 units, et cetera. There's a handful of towns nearby that are using Turning Technologies equipment. So if we went with them, we could potentially partner with some of those towns. I based my presentation on what I heard from you guys at the last hearing, so I was trying to address all of your questions and concerns. I did hear there was a question about are other communities using it and what's the feedback there. Just using the Turning Point Technologies equipment, towns that have open town meeting that are using it are Avon, Dover rented some units this past spring for their town meeting, Rockport, Webster, Winchendon, and Wayland is using electronic voting, but they went with a different company. But I wanted to include them as a town that's comparable to us in size and whatnot that is continuing to use it. Oops, sorry. I went too far. Some other towns that are using it but that have a representative town meeting, so fixed numbers, they know exactly how many people up to a certain point are going to come every time: Belmont, Falmouth, and Stoughton. There were some concerns about security issues, and there was potential problems that Wayland had to deal with their first year using electronic voting that had been brought up. I actually spoke with their assistant town clerk, and she sent me a bunch of materials that if you want me to forward what she sent me, I'm happy to do that. They did have issues in their first year with what they called proxy voting, which was, I get up to go to the restroom and I hand my clicker to my husband and say, here, just hold this for me. Not necessarily that my husband would then vote, but there was a concern that that could occur. So they addressed it from 3 directions: education, prevention, and detection and resolution. They also, Wayland has a committee that actually runs electronic voting at their town meetings. They call it the Elvis Committee. It's an acronym. And so they have a committee that's on site that it's elected or appointed, I'm not sure, but they're actually helping to oversee the process of the voting at town meeting. For education, they printed up flyers explaining what you can and cannot do. They produced a video tutorial, and the moderator has added a lot of extra instruction to his or her speech when they start town meeting about what is acceptable and what the process is. If you have to go to the restroom, you need to do X, Y, and Z with your clicker, et cetera. Prevention, to make sure that a visitor could not get a clicker. They issue visitor cards, similar to what we do with our check-in process in general. They also instituted exit desks so that as people leave, they have to turn in their device, or if they're going to the restroom, they actually have to temporarily hand their device over to the exit desk. And then detection and resolution, if someone notices an incident that could be considered proxy voting, like someone's got 2 clickers in their hands, they can raise a point of privilege, and the moderator is also empowered to intervene if they see something untoward. But she did say after that first year, when they instituted all of this, they haven't had a problem since. There's been no complaints, no allegations of untoward activity, and they've moved forward with their electronic voting, and she felt it was very successful in their community. There was some question about could devices be tampered with? Would there be a way to, quote unquote, hack the system? The gentleman that we spoke to there, Greg Alexander, this is a direct quote, hacking of Turning Point cannot happen. Each remote clicker voting device has a unique device ID. In town meeting, the only devices that will be recognized in tallying the votes are those that have been allowed prior to the meeting. Votes from any other device, real or manipulated, would not be accepted. So you couldn't fudge a vote from your phone to mimic the clicker. It's just not possible. And this was a question that I had. Someone had made a comment that people coming and going, turning in their clickers might impact the quorum, and if there were not enough voters in the room to meet the quorum. And I wasn't quite sure what that line of thought was in reference to, because my understanding was if there is no quorum, I mean, that's an issue with any type of voting method. If people are leaving and you don't have a quorum, you can't really proceed if you're undernumbered. But I included that because it did come up, and I wasn't exactly sure what the concern there was, so I wanted to revisit it. My opinion of what the benefits for the residents would be. Number one, anonymity for residents while they're voting. I think there would be a much greater comfort level as far as people feeling like they can vote their conscience or as they see fit without any judgment or perceived potential retribution from anyone else in the room, their neighbor, any town board members, etc. The other town clerks that I've spoken with in other towns that have used it, they do feel it has expedited their voting process. It can drastically cut down the length of town meeting, depending on debate, but some of these standing votes can take a good 10, 15 minutes to count. This would trim those down to, a couple of minutes per vote. Another issue that I thought of was that you wouldn't then be requiring residents to stand in place for potentially long periods of time while the standing votes are counted. I think about my mother. She's 76, so she has a bad back. And she said she didn't want to come to town meeting this year because she didn't want to have to stand in place for a good 10 minutes while votes were being counted. And I think that is a lot to ask of some of our residents. It can be very uncomfortable and could potentially discourage them from either attending or standing up to make sure that they're actually counted. We don't know. They might sit down before they've actually been included. So I think it would just ease that burden on some people for whom it could be a lot to ask. And it would ensure the accuracy of the vote counts. I mean, I think there is always a potential margin of human error involved with counting standing votes. And this would eliminate that. We heard that there were some concerns from town council about the viability of the article as written, so we wanted to just address that a little bit. We did consult Mass General Law before we drafted the article, and I also reached out to the Attorney General's office to make sure that we had looked in the right place, that the bylaw change must be in accordance with Mass General laws pertaining to moderator duties, and that is I won't bore you by reading it, but I guess the concern was taking away the option of a voice vote or maybe taking away the option of the standing vote. And nowhere in Mass General Law does it say you have to allow a voice vote or a standing vote. I checked. I couldn't find any. It says that she absolutely, he or she has the right to make the public declaration of all the votes, but there's no specification as to how the vote occurs. So we were not really sure as to why there was a concern about changing the method of voting or even the primary method of voting or any method of voting, that would be an issue. And we read that there was also some concern about mixed voting method because we had specified if there was more people than there were clickers to move into an overflow room. That was also, Mass General Law requires the overflow room. I couldn't find anything that said that you couldn't have two different methods of voting on the same issue, that you could have electronic from some, hand count or whatever from another. But that being said, I do understand the concern expressed that it could make some people feel like they were left out. So I would be willing to discuss amending that part of the article. I don't know that it's necessary to specify if there's enough clickers for everybody. If we ensure that we have the right number of units for people at town meeting, then it's a non-issue either way. But again, I couldn't find anything in Mass General Law that would specify that was out of scope, having the overflow room. But I'm not an attorney, so did I go too far? Oh, yes, I grabbed a few clips from our most recent town meeting because there was some question as to, well, do we know whether or not a standing vote could potentially be inaccurate? So I just wanted to show a couple of moments. This first one was from, unable to play video. Okay, let's see if any of the videos work. The first one was, I can tell you what it was. It was Alice during the standing vote for the yeas on Article 22. She had to remind people to stay in place or their vote would not be counted. The second video, this one.
Again, I'm going to ask people to stay where they are so the vote counters can get an accurate vote count.
That was during the nay votes for the same article. So for one article, Alice had to remind people twice that to make sure the count was accurate, people should not be moving around. And these next two clips, I intend no disrespect. The first one is George. You can see him right about there, walking during the vote, and then moving back to his spot. And again, I intend no disrespect, and I'll explain why I chose these two clips, is actually the chairwoman right about there, walking, and then moving back to her spot. The reason I selected those particular, there were many other examples of people walking around, but what struck me was if members of this board who are keenly aware of process can have a moment where you've been standing a long time and maybe you wander a little bit, I think the odds of residents who are not necessarily as aware of what the requirements of the process are for a standing vote, it's highly likely that some of them might have been moving around as well. So I know there was some question that, is there any evidence that the standing vote process may not be 100% accurate? And that's why I chose to show some video clips. The other information, there was talk of forming a committee. Apparently there have been some committee discussions on electronic voting previously in town. The bylaw committee in 2013 was looking into adopting electronic voting. They had a demo. They spoke to folks in Wayland as well. Wayland seems to be very popular as far as talking to them about electronic voting. They seem to have decided that looking into it further and taking the investigation of adopting the process was worthwhile. And I believe they even made a presentation and a demonstration was made to the Finance and Warrant Commission that was seated at that time. That's what was listed. And then finally, the last piece that I'd like to show, apparently there's been some level of support even as far back as 2010 or maybe earlier. This was a letter from our town administrator, Mike Gillette, to a gentleman who I believe at the time it was sent was a selectman in Wayland. There was a Wayland town bulletin board where they were discussing electronic voting, and the recipient of the letter had shared it. And it sounded like that the vibe in Westwood at that time was favorable towards looking towards it. So it's not a new topic. There's a lot of residents that still are interested in pursuing it. I'm not quite sure why it's stalled previously, when most of the feedback based on investigation of it was favorable, but we felt it was time to bring it forward again because people are still asking about it, particularly with some votes coming up within the next couple of years on some very big topics that could, A, cause very long town meetings, and B, could be emotional and or contentious, and I think it would be worthwhile to make sure that there's no doubt about those votes. There's no doubt about those counts in either direction, whichever way the votes go. I think it's important for everybody to know that the process, the integrity is maintained. And that is it for me.
Thank you, Ms. Rawlings. As with the prior petitioner article, we did seek counsel from town council on these articles as well. Mr. McCusker, would you please share your thoughts with us on these two articles in terms of the legality?
So pretty much laid out in the memo I sent, and in the memo, I go through with an affirmative vote to show to take away from the moderator all of the various authorities, and that the vote shall There's no provision in there for the moderator to call for a standing vote or for residents to doubt the vote as declared by the moderator. And it takes away the ability of the moderator to order a secret ballot if she deems it proper. The principal problem that I see with it is that voters would be treated differently, that people who got there early on would get one of these devices, and others would go into another room where they would have to vote in the old-fashioned way, which to me is the right way, but don't quote me on that. So I think it just creates too many problems. I know the town is looking into it, and it's going to have some sort of a pilot program, I think, at the town meeting. And I think we should wait.
Is there someone who is going to speak to Dottie, to the pilot program that we've heard about from Ms. Rawlings? Please, thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Paul Fitzgerald, 314 Dover Road, the former chairman of the Bylaw Review Committee, and I'm here to talk a little bit about the history which the petitioner mentioned. The Bylaw Review Committee, working with the town clerk, did look into the issue of electronic voting. We did meet with people from Wayland. We did do a presentation to the FinCom a few years back that some people may remember. It was the consensus of the Bylaw Review Committee that the electronic voting had merit, and it was something that we should move towards. What we believed the next step in the process would be a pilot at a town meeting. We thought there should be a pilot for two reasons. Reason number one, the public education. We would show the voters how it would work. We would be able to have a demonstration, and then we would be able to get a sense after the voters used it of the town meeting as to what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it, because at the end of the day, they're the constituency that would have to decide this. The second reason we thought that a pilot was the best way to go was to work out any technical difficulties that we wouldn't foresee until we actually got to a town meeting and operated it. Would we have to change any of the means and methods by which we conduct our town meeting? Would we have to make any technological changes to the theater where we conduct most of our town meetings? So we thought a pilot program would allow us to see what bugs or what issues had to be resolved. As Ms. Rollins has noted, there are some questions about what people do with their device when they leave the floor, how they get it, those sorts of things. And we thought that we should work out the bugs so that when we did go to electronic voting, it was as smooth a transition as possible. We could do it effectively, and we could make a good start with it. We did not want to have issues and problems that would sour people on the process of electronic voting. So we thought that the pilot was the next step to go. I'm pleased to know that there is going to be a pilot at the fall town meeting. I think that's the right step to take, so we can get a sense of the town meeting, we can do the education that we need, we can work out any bugs, and hopefully by the annual town meeting, be ready to go. So that was the census. The Bylaw Review Committee felt that this was definitely an idea whose time has come. This was something that we should move towards, and I'm personally pleased that we're going to go with the pilot program. I think that's the right way to go. I think also I want to say that we're very fortunate that Dottie has spent the amount of time to educate herself on this issue as she has. She was at Linfield last night. She's researched it, and so we're fortunate, in my opinion, as we go forward on this, that we will have the town clerk to lead us in this effort. And I think we would be well served to listen to her judgment on this and to follow her guidance, because she has studied it, she knows where we want to go, and I know Dottie is committed to having the best town meetings, the most deliberative, the most fair, and the most open town meetings we can possibly have, which is what we all want. So I want to commend Dottie for the work she's done on it, and I think we have a real resource here. I do have one concern, and I make this not as a former bylaw review chairman, only as a citizen of Westwood, as someone who was at one time the head of Common Cause Massachusetts and who spent a lot of time working for fair elections and due process. I'm deeply concerned about the overflow issue. An overflow room should only be used, in my opinion, where there is no space available for resident voters. If a voter comes to town meeting and there is a spot for them in the main auditorium where the meeting is being conducted, they should sit there. They should not have to go to an overflow room. They're difficult to have. I've had to preside over some overflow rooms. We had one at the Springtown meeting. There are difficulties in communication, in making sure that people who want to speak are recognized. So I'm concerned that you would make people go to an overflow room if there were seats in the main auditorium. Like I said, we should only use an overflow room if there's no place for any registered voter to sit. And in fact, if we have visitors in the main theater, they should be moved before people are sent to an overflow room. I absolutely agree that the law does mandate that there's an overflow room, but it's designed for when there's no room in the inn, as it were. So I'm concerned about that aspect of the petition, but I understand the petitioner understands that there's some issues, and I think that that's something that could be resolved. But other than that, as I said, it's an idea whose time has come. The Bylaw Review Committee, I know Mr. Fiscaldo is here. He agreed with us that this is an idea whose time has come, and we ought to do the pilot, work out the bugs, and be ready to move to electronic voting. Thank you.
Madam Clerk?
Hello. Thank you very much, Ellen, for putting everything together. Your article does have a lot of merit. We have been working on this since 2013. We've done a lot of research. We've had Wayland, they had a committee, so we had their committee person come in, chairperson, and do a demonstration for us. At the end of the day, what I want is for people to go to town meeting and feel that their votes are heard. And I think up to this point, we've done a great job with collecting votes. It's town meeting, and it's always been that way. We do standing votes. Can we make it better, more efficient? Yes, we can. And I think we didn't want to be the first town. Wayland was one of the first towns to do electronic voting. We didn't want to be one of the first towns. We wanted to see how the other towns that have followed suit, how it's worked with them. And it seems like, you know, the past couple of months there's been a few more towns that are kind of getting on board. And a lot of it is with the moderators. It's something new. It's, you know, nobody knows how it's going to work. So I think in terms of even changing a bylaw, we don't want to make any changes yet. The first thing we want to do is we want to do a pilot. We want the townspeople to see exactly how this works. And I was in Linfield last night. It was very easy. I was surprised how easy it was. And it runs on a radio frequency. There's, you know, no worry about any votes being tampered. It's very simple. And I think by bringing this to the town meeting, this will get people comfortable and they will vote for it. At the end of the day, it's not what I want or anybody else wants, it's what our voters want, what the people of this town want. And if they decide at town meeting when we've brought the pilot and given them information that this is what they want, I think we're going to turn around and do it. I do have another concern as well. I've been working with them. I've gotten quite a few price quotes along the way. Turning Technology is probably one of the best ones because you can purchase it. The others, some of the others are only rentals, and it's pretty expensive to rent for every meeting. And I think that, you know, just being able to have them come out and do this for us is great. The only thing I would say, we'd have to purchase at least 500 devices. And if we have a town meeting article that says we're going to appropriate 20,000, so we've appropriated that, and we need more than 350, are we going to be able to get the money someplace else? And you really want to make sure that everybody that comes to town meeting is able to sit in the same area unless it's an overflow, or if we know we have a large town meeting. We've had town meetings with 1,300 people, and we've had the gymnasium set up. And in that case, everybody is in one room, but we want to make sure that we have enough devices for everybody. And if that means that we have to purchase X amount and then rent what we need, or hopefully, as more towns are doing this, we'll be able to share with different towns. And I also think if we do make the investment, it's not only for voting at town meeting, perhaps the schools can use it, some of your committees can use it. It's a great tool, I think. So, you know, I believe we have been doing a lot of work on this. We've been working diligently, and I think the next step is to take this to town meeting. We get a sense of what town meeting wants. We're going to do a questionnaire, and we're also going to do a slide to give us immediate results so that we can see, so everybody can see what people really want. And I think at that point, once we know that, we'll work a little bit further, and we'll get language, and we'll work with town council to make sure we have the appropriate language in there, in our bylaws. Thank you.
Questions from FinCom? Barb?
I think most of the towns that have adopted it, they haven't done it through a petitioner article. They've done it through an ad hoc committee that has studied it and made proposals going forward. So is there a committee, or has the bylaw committee disbanded, or is it in existence? Or is there a formal committee with people appointed by the moderator, since the moderator will be mostly affected by this?
There's not a formal committee. The bylaw review committee under the charter has the bylaw review committee under the charter meets on a 10-year basis for a limited number of years. It's not a permanent ongoing committee. It's designed to...
But you're still alive then?
Well, no, we finished our first lifespan. Was over, so we disbanded because the charter doesn't envision it as a permanent committee. It envisions it as a committee that meets for a specific period of time, and then a time goes by and it meets again just to look at the bylaws, best practices, that sort of stuff. But we did do a lot of information gathering. The clerk has that information. She was our principal investigator, and which is why I said we're fortunate that we have someone who we can really use as a resource here. So I think that the pilot is the next step to go. Then we can really do the public education real time with people actually seeing it, experiencing it, and understanding it.
Okay, so you've already made the decision by going forward that anonymity in our voting is fine, because that, to me, is the big complaint I have about not doing a stand-up vote is now we're having anonymity in voting and secret balloting by doing electronic voting. And so you've already now decided we're going forward with that. We're not having a discussion on that. We're having a discussion on the merits of electronic voting.
No, I disagree. I think by doing a pilot, we're doing exactly what you suggest, which is to let the people see it, and they could tell us at the end of that town meeting, we think this is a bad idea, we don't want to go forward, but we're giving the people an opportunity to have the kind of education that we think is needed, and then see where we go from there. So I don't think any decision. Ultimately it's a decision of the town meeting members. It's not, as Dottie said, it's not a decision for anybody really in this room, except as we vote at town meeting.
And it is simply a pilot. It's a pilot to see, is this what Westwood wants?
So I assume you'll do it on what articles that we, are unanimous articles that, like early ones,
We haven't really, we haven't decided that yet. We still have to meet with the vendor and with the moderator to decide what we're going to do with the
I
articles.
really recommend that there be a committee, an ad hoc committee that is put together that isn't being driven by the vendor, that it's being driven more by the town.
Well, it's not, this isn't being driven by any particular vendor. There's not that many vendors out there that do it. And we have met with 3 of them, actually. So it's, this is not being driven by any vendor. And a lot of the towns, there's, so Linfield I was in last night, Rockport actually did it a few months ago as well. They did not have a committee together. Their moderator decided they wanted to try it, and the clerk, and they did, and both towns were surprisingly happy about it.
Because, so have we looked at the towns that have had committees that have chosen not to go that route? Because I know there have been quite a few.
No, we haven't. And I think at this point in time, we started this in 2013. We've done a lot of research. We had a committee, the Bylaw Review Committee. We went to many public hearings about it, and I think we have enough information so that to start all over again with a committee would just be, I don't think it would be that valuable.
But then,
Yeah, I just want to raise 4 issues, and I think need to be thoroughly vetted before we would go forward with something like this. One is security. I'm really not very comfortable hearing from the president of the company that his system is secure. I think we've all learned in today's world that the sophistication, even of a good high school student with a computer, there's not much you can't hack. And even RF, which I have a lot of experience in, it's very readable, very easy to break into these systems. So security, to me, is a very, very big issue. The other one is transparency. And probably one of my biggest concerns is I think the elected officials in this town, and even those of us who serve as volunteers, we have some very critical, sensitive issues. And I think we have an obligation to stand up in front of town meeting on votes, and the citizens need to see how we're voting. And I would be somewhat disturbed, frankly, if my I want to know how my elected officials are voting. And I actually feel, as a FinCom member, we have a critical article where we may not have unanimity on it, that I want to know, see how is the FinCom voting? Are they standing by what their recommendation was, or their planning board? So I think you're taking a key dynamic out of, to me, what are the essence of the Westwood town meetings when you're 30 to 50 elected and town officials, and think of who's in front of that audience. It's the FinCom, the school committee, the planning board, the selectmen, and various other committees. We see how they vote. And taking that away really, really, to me, is changing the dynamics of town meeting. The third thing is education. We get maybe sometimes 300, 400, 500. I think at the high school we had 1,000 people show up, but there are 10,000 eligible voters plus, I think, in this community. And I think it's not just educating a few, frankly, several hundred. I think my guess is we'll have a fairly small town meeting at this fall meeting. I think you've got to educate the town, and I think there's got to be a reach out and an engagement of the town, because I may go to town meeting today, but I may not be able to make the spring meeting. Now, I think there's a very large education that has to take place for the whole electorate to decide, is this something they want to see the town shift to? And I think it's such a major change in the dynamics of the way this town has conducted itself. The fourth thing is technology. I'm a very early adapter of technology, and to me, the thing we have to look at is, you talk about your 76-year-old mother. Well, one of the arguments I can make is you could register her online from a laptop at home, have it as secure as any clicker device, and why shouldn't that person be allowed, if they're invalid, why couldn't we allow remote voting? So I think it's not just looking at a clicker. You've got to look at all of the technologies that may be evolving over the next 3, 4, 5 years or 10 years and say, where does Westwood want to put itself on the spectrum? How do we want, if we're going to shift to electronic voting or a new type of technology, let's step back and really, really look at it. So I'll summarize. I think security is an issue, transparency and accountability is an issue. You have to educate the town, not just a few town meeting members. And I think if you're going to go to one technology, let's evaluate, where all this technology is going, and does it change the way we as a town want to conduct ourselves?
My question first for Dottie was for renting additional units. How do you know if you need to rent those in advance? That was actually my original question, but Barb and George brought up triggered another question. I think they both make a great point in terms of transparency and elected officials, appointed officials, having a public vote. Are there any towns that have electronic voting that show up on a screen all of the board members' votes, various board members, elected officials, so that you could have anonymous voting by the general residency and then public vote?
No, not an open town meeting. Representative town meeting you would, but not open town meeting.
What do you think of that thought?
I don't really agree with that. It's, I think it's no different. Town meeting is different, but I think it's no different than you were to, there's a ballot question that's going to affect everybody in town. You vote in a private voting booth. Nobody knows how you vote. So I know town meeting is a different scope, but if you kind of think about it that way as well.
And back to the rented units, how do you know in advance if you need them or not? Is it going to be a 400-person night or a 1,300-person
what
night?
Typically, just over the last 10, 15 years, we have had a few town meetings with 1,300 residents. So, and usually it's any big items, if there's going to be an override, if there's, when we had the police station, university station, we knew those were going to be big meetings. And we prepared for them. We prepared to have those meetings in the gymnasium. We had seats. So typically, our town meetings, if there's nothing, controversial, we may have 300 people. Sometimes it's hard to get a quorum. It's 175. So, on average, we probably have about 300 at a meeting. It's great if we have more, but typically not. But I would make sure that we had at least 500. And if at any point in time, we had any reason to believe there was going to be more, if there's surrounding towns that have them, we would borrow them. And I just want you to know, this isn't something that, we decided this is what we want to do. This comes from residents approaching us and telling us they wanted to see something different. Maybe people aren't happy with the way the votes are counted at town meeting, and I can assure you we do a great job. And, if you go to many open town meetings, voting is the same. We've tried a lot of different things. We've tried, so that you talk about people standing up, we've tried cards, and we can go back to that too, so people don't have to stand up, so they can sit and be comfortable in their seat.
Thanks.
I would second what Dottie said about planning. I've served as assistant town moderator a number of town meetings, and we have always been very good at guessing when we're going to need an overflow room, when we're going to have to plan for it, and we've never been caught short. We've always, in fact, we've overplanned. We've had one or two times where we thought we might need more of an overflow room than we did, but we've never had to scramble at the last minute for an overflow room.
Thank you.
And I have to say, I'm probably very conservative, because there have been many town meetings that we weren't going to do an overflow room, and I'd always say we have to go that extra step, because you don't want anybody to be disenfranchised and not be able to have a seat. And George, getting back to your question on security, so what this is, it's radio frequency, and it's just a device that goes, it's a flash drive that goes right into your laptop. And this is programmed for that town meeting, so nobody could come in with anything, nobody could be voting from home. It's very secure. And that's why I think when you see the pilot, you will see just how secure it is and how the ease of use. And it really, I don't recommend every article anyways. I think if we do go to do this, I would think it would just be when the moderator has a hard time deciphering a voice vote.
Tally, I don't want to get into debate, but if it's wireless and RF frequency, it can be, you could probably shut, a semi-pro could shut that system down in about 10 minutes.
I'm going to move this along a bit, because it is getting late, and we still have more to do that's important. So
You have a question,
Mike has a question, Julie has a question, and then
I have a
Howard.
question, too.
So Mike, Julie, Howard.
We'll see how fast it
Okay.
goes.
Go quick about it. First of all, thanks to Ms. Rawlings for moving the debate forward and also being so responsive to all of our questions. Great information tonight, very helpful, and also to you guys as well. My question, Dottie, is when you do the pilot, first of all, I'm not sure I agree with Barb that we ought to do it on live questions, even ones that we've unanimously. What I would suggest to you, this is more of a suggestion and question, is why don't we come up with it, maybe ask Ms. Rawlings and Paul and others and the moderator, let's come up with a questionnaire, 5 questions or 6 questions about electronic voting. Ask people to vote using the electronic items on those dummy questions that have no real import other than advisory to the town on what people think about this. So I personally disagree with George and Barb. I do not think people should have to stand up and be counted. It's a secret vote. We're all accountable here, but we don't necessarily have to be accountable. We vote as people, not FinCom members. But I do think the town should voice their opinion on that. That could be question 3 on your on your pilot test. Yeah.
Julie and then Howard.
Yeah, and I, thank you, great work, ton of research. I like your idea, Mike, because I guess I'm hearing the pilot really focus, the scope is around usability, and less kind of, I'm with you, Barb, in the sense of, if we're going to make a fundamental shift philosophically about voting, how do we get, and I'm sure people have come to you, but I'm sure there's a cohort of people that feel differently, and there's reasons towns haven't moved ahead. So I think we have to be honest and look at the pros and cons. We heard a lot of cons, and I agree with them, but I have to believe, I'm sorry, we heard a lot of pros. I have to believe there's some cons we have to consider. So I like your suggestion, Mike. I just don't know that the pilot, as it's been described, will get at the con. So there may be a need to have some sort of SWAT team. I know committee sounds exhaustive, but if we are going to make this move, I think it should be, in addition to all the work done, a little bit more thoughtful.
Howard?
Just to be explicit, you're suggesting a no vote on these two articles and a town clerk article in the spring that we'll have plenty of time to have this discussion all over again.
My own view is that
Right.
we need to do a pilot, we need to get a sense of the town meeting, we need to make sure we understand any technical bugs, procedural things. That would be my advice, yes.
And we also have to control the town council so that we have
Properly,
a correct
yes, right.
bylaw.
Can I just follow up on that one?
Go ahead.
These are all valid points, and knowing where they're going now, Ms. Rawlings, how do you feel about your petition at this point?
That was actually something I forgot to mention, is that I did speak with Dottie earlier today just to find out where things were at, because I heard about this pilot test and I was very excited. And I would personally welcome the opportunity to work with our town officials, Dottie and whoever else the moderator. I think we could probably come up with something that would make sense for everybody as far as amending the articles. I'm not sure what the right procedure would be to do with the article that I have, but I think it would be a really great opportunity to collaborate.
Would that be something that would draw the article now?
I don't know whether it would be withdraw, amend. I think that's a bigger discussion, but I'm open to amending the article to make it more amenable.
Well, I think they're gonna do the pilot program.
Right.
So the warrant article may be a little premature in the fall town meeting.
That's a good question, and I think that's something maybe we could discuss and figure out if there's a way to move forward one way or another together.
I think it would be great for you to have that discussion.
Yeah,
and-
we'd love to work together, absolutely.
Chris
No,
had a question. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Sorry, I shut you down.
Sorry.
Just one quick question. How long do they come up with new ones like, the iPhone 10? I mean, has this been a standard technology?
It's just a very simple little, it's tiny. It's
So
like a
it doesn't make
cigarette
sense,
pack.
so buying it would be the same as renting?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically, it's a small remote device, and there's a yes and a no button, and the moderator will start open polling, and will ask the town meeting to vote.
So-
1 for yes, 2 for no, and that's it. It's very, very simple, very simple.
Can I ask one last tiny
Actually,
little
Chris
question?
has the next
Sorry.
question. He's been really patient. Then you, George.
Thank you.
I had a question with regard to the wording of this article. Dottie, can you tell in short form, section F, G, and H, as they're proposed to be omitted from our bylaw? What are they talking about in
Well,
F, G, and H?
That would actually take all of the, pretty much all of the rights of the moderator.
Is that essentially our voting procedures? Is that what they're alluding to it?
Yes.
So
Like a
what I'm
single
looking at, I'm
vote.
hearing there are possible
Voice
glitches that
vote.
may come up. In the way that this is worded, and this may be something you talk about if and when you amend this, it looks like the moderator has no recourse if there is a technical glitch, because they've omitted any alternative ways of voting. So if it goes on the fritz, town meeting is over. If this were to pass this way, because there's no way the moderator would be out of bounds to suggest an alternative way our old way of voting because it wouldn't be part of this.
That's why we have to look at it further.
I get that. I'm all for the pilot program. I'm fine with that.
No,
I'm addressing,
They're changing the bylaws too, and, you know, I did look at some other towns that are instituting it, and they've put a lot of
provisions. Yeah, I
provisions
think.
in their bylaws, so that definitely would have to be looked at.
My last thought was, you brought it up, that sometimes we struggle for quorum. Putting numbers to a vote that previously had been just voice, sometimes we'll get a quorum call, and the evening may be over.
But however, on the other side of it, the meeting I was at last night, there was a quorum there, but not everybody votes.
Right, I know.
So you don't, so sometimes people
I
abstain.
get that, but it calls in a
And you know
possible
what?
another delay
If
while we go
a
through that.
registered, you know, voter questions a quorum, then we'd have to have a
Right,
count.
no, I get that. It's just, this may call more quorum calls in the future if 160 people vote by way of device. We don't know how many have abstained.
Or you hand in your device as you leave. They know.
George has a question.
That's the exact thing I was gonna focus on too, Dottie. If it's electronic voting and you get 174 votes, and then don't you need an option to have people let you know they are abstaining?
No.
So then you're gonna get, you're gonna get automatic, questions of a quorum.
You don't know how many units are up. You don't know how many units are still there, though.
Yeah, I mean, you've checked people in and nobody is left. You know.
If you saw once, you know what happens at the end of town meeting. I'm very frank here, that when it's a hot issue, people will stay. And we are very lucky, let's be frank, I'm sure there've been some voice votes, but we haven't had a quorum. But now it's gonna be very obvious that if you get 139 votes, there probably is not a quorum there. So you gotta think through, what do you do when that happens? Is town meeting over?
And that's something that, you know, moving forward, if we do decide to do something like this, the moderator is going to have to make that announcement quite a few times during the meeting.
You get a legal count by registering people. Okay, so now people are walking out the door and they're handing in their little clicker things, and all of a sudden you drop below a quorum. You are legally now below a quorum. You have to announce that.
And that's if there's a voter that questions a quorum.
Is the quorum call in one of those omited F, G, and H
No.
passes?
Yeah.
Okay, it's somewhere else.
No,
in the
those are just ways to vote.
This is committee stuff.
Let me interject for a minute. I think we're getting way beyond the scope of this, okay? These are all great issues, but we have Ms. Rawlings' article, 2 articles. We've heard from them. We've heard what the pilot is. I don't think it really helps to get into the minutia of the quorum and how this might work, particularly given the hour. But
Okay, I just simply wanted to say that at the beginning of the meeting, the moderator announced the presence of a quorum. And that quorum is there unless somebody doubts it. So you could have 15 people in the room. If nobody doubted the quorum, you had a quorum.
Are there, we've already had a very broad discussion on this, but if there are any questions or comments from residents, Mr. Fiscaldo?
Ken Fiscaldo, 35 Norfolk Ave. I was on the charter study. I was on the bylaw study committee. We looked at this. That was back in 2013, 4 years ago. Nothing has moved forward. No studies, no pilots, nothing in 4 years. And that's a shame because it's a good opportunity to increase our attendance, because what we heard from other towns that use this, their attendance at town meeting went up. Because believe it or not, some people don't like to stand up and be counted. They're very happy to vote, but they don't want to stand up and alienate a neighbor, alienate a school teacher, a fireman, or whatever. So we miss those people at town meeting. Attendance has increased. There's an intimidation factor when you have to stand up. As far as how our public officials vote, we should know that anyhow by how they support articles. They're going to stand up and speak in support or against an article. We're going to know that anyhow. We shouldn't be led by who's standing up and who's not standing up. I would just like to say that we should move forward vigorously with a deadline on getting a pilot done, getting a study done, and move forward so we can get into the 21st century and make our town meeting more effective.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this article? Yes, sir.
Brian Gorman,
Is this on?
It is.
All right, Brian Gorman, 145 School Street. I'm a member of the planning board. I'm speaking as a resident. I want to echo your thoughts. At the last spring meeting, you talk about intimidation. I was heckled by an individual behind me, and at one point grabbed by the belt strap, pulled down while I was standing for a vote. So as far as anonymity and intimidation, it happens. And I also echo your point as far as it seems like it's taken this article to come to this point for the pilot to go forward. So I really don't want it to be delayed any further in that aspect too. I'd like to push it forward to vote at the town meeting.
Thank you, sir. That's, thanks for sharing that. It's shocking to hear that. Any other questions or comments on this article? Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for the great discussion. We have one more article. Ms. Conant, last but not least, welcome.
Oh, no, it's good. I'm just getting shorter.
This is Article P on the list.
Ellen, you can actually go to the next slide.
If you would please just state
I'm
your
sorry.
full name and your address.
Debbie Conant, 21 Strasser Ave.
Thank you.
So this article here is to take the means of indefinite postponement away from, not away from the citizens' petition, but to allow the citizens to make the first motion on an article. Indefinite postponement is a procedural barrier to the article, means of terminating any further discussion, causes feelings of disconnect between town leaderships and residents. Wording does not allow access to the underlying article, which is the democratic right and privilege of all citizens to vote upon. Town meeting is a democratic process and is a valuable means for Massachusetts taxpayers to voice their opinions and directly affect change in their communities, and that's in the Citizens Guide to Town Meeting. So in some towns, it is customary to recognize the sponsor of the petition and have them make the first motion, and this is right from town meeting times. Many towns do utilize this practice. A few of them are Natick, Amherst, and Webster. Other towns do not use the verbiage indefinite postponement. You either vote for or against the article. An example of that is Ashland. When I went back and did 6 years of research on articles, approximately in the last 6 years, there are 234 articles presented to town meeting. 230 were town-related articles. Of those 230, 227 were recommended to vote. 3 of them were indefinitely postponed. In the last, actually 10 years, the petition articles, only 4 have ever been presented, and all 4 of them were indefinitely postponed. I went back and I watched the video and looked at all the concerns and questions that people had. So I'm going to take 3 of them together, the first, the second, and actually the last one. That you voted indefinite postponement on articles, that is correct. Not sure if you should segregate citizens' petitions, and this could expand to all boards. The only argument I have against that is that you're a town-appointed board, and that the other boards that come before you are all town committees and boards. So would it be appropriate for you to make the first motion? But as a citizen's petition, we don't have the backing of the town, and that's why we feel that we should make the first motion on a citizen's petition. Makes the statement FinCom is biased against citizens' petitions. We're not saying that. The numbers do reflect that more are indefinitely postponed for citizens. Does town meeting, okay, even if indefinitely postponed, one can make the presentation about the article, and that is correct. However, you have to get into making a presentation about indefinite postponement, then you have to make a presentation about the article. So it prolongs the meeting, and it's still a very confusing concept for people. Does town meeting times mandate that FinCom make the first motion? No, it does not. Chapter 4, page 62 says that they do not, as I showed you in the previous slide. Are there any state laws about this? No, there are not. It is something that individual towns can adopt, and in order to make this a simpler method for residents, we're just asking for your support to help move this forward. And as the article states, let us make the first motion. It does not impede you from saying indefinitely postpone. It just lets us make the first motion. People still will look to you for what they should do, as you saw by those 234 articles presented. It just gives us a little bit more. We don't have the advantage of being associated with the town, so it helps us to be able to present the article without having to go through indefinite postponement.
Thank you. Questions from FinCom?
Marianne, I have a question.
Yeah,
Can you go back to the slide that showed the number of times that so what is this exactly? 4 petition articles, and of the 4 articles, all were I think we did like 4 last year. So what is that exactly?
That means that, so I went back, originally, so because we had to defeat indefinite postponement in my last article last year, I went back 10 years.
Which you did.
Which I did, but I went back 10 years, and there was only 4 articles presented from which were last year. And they were all indefinitely postponed. And
4 petitioner articles
yes, yes.
in the last 10 years. So
In the
we're on
last 10
4.
years, there's only been 4 petitioner articles that what? Like, I don't understand what you're, because we've done way more, just in the 3 years that I've been on this board, there have been more than 4 petitioner articles that have come before the board.
I think a lot were withdrawn.
Cindy.
Oh,
There
they're
might be,
withdrawn.
have been 4 in front of us, but I don't know. But in 10 years, that seems.
Yeah, very low.
I went back 10 years last year, this year I went back 6, and it still remains at 4. It's a very tiring, long procedure to do that.
Well, but if you are asking the town to vote on something, then it should be a long, tiring procedure. And if this board recommends indefinite postponement and you want to have it discussed, there are still ways to go about doing that. And town boards that we have, because we also have indefinitely postponed. Right, and I think it's been more than 3, because I know it's been more than that, just in the amount of time that I've
I
been
don't think,
here.
in the interest of time, I don't think we should get hung up on how many, maybe in the past. I think we hear the point, and I think you're right to raise the issue. And we hear the point that you're making. Look, my own family brought a petitioner article, and it was not recommended by FinCom, and it was not passed at town meeting, but it was a good process. And, so I would say that I don't think there's, having served on this board for a number of years, I don't think there's any innate bias against petitioners. To the contrary, I think FinCom, from my experience, tends to be even more open-minded when we have petitioners who put so much of their own time into bringing petitioner articles. But other questions?
So, and not that I don't trust your research, but does Town Councilor Doughty have any input on what the bylaws allow around the statements of how motions can be presented at town meeting?
Tom?
Sorry, I wasn't quite sure.
Do you have any input on how motions can be presented at town meeting? Does it have to? Is there anything in our town bylaws or state, or is there any requirements around?
The town charter and the town bylaws provide that the Finance Commission's motion on all of the articles will be considered the main motion. And it also mentions indefinite postponement, which cannot be amended. The moderator, in my years in town, has always allowed the person who wants to overturn indefinite postponement to discuss the merits of the article in his or her presentation. Then the vote comes on indefinite postponement, and if indefinite postponement fails, a motion has to be made to affirmatively pass the article. But it's in our bylaws and in the charter.
Other questions from FinCom members? Questions or comments from residents? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Nada Milosavljevic Fabrizio, 32 Webster Street. I wish I had collaborated with Ellen and Debbie when you put the videos together about the last town meeting. I am with this proposal, this about having the petitioner make the first motion. I'm going to use myself as an example, and I'm going to embarrass myself. At town meeting in May of 2017, the articles for controversial subjects were brought up at town meeting. Indefinite postponement. What happens if I vote yes? What happens if I vote no? With all due respect to the town moderator, she tried to explain things, but it wasn't explained so that everybody in the town meeting could understand it. The indefinite postponement, the FinCom, or whoever recommends indefinite postponement, they talk and they talk and they talk, and an hour goes by. You can watch the video. Anybody can watch this recording from the May town meeting. When all was said and done on certain controversial articles, I got up to the podium and I looked at the audience and I asked, am I the only one in this room that didn't understand what just happened? Because there were controversial articles that the Finance Commission had recommended for indefinite postponement that it was confusing. And I just think that if a petitioner has a warrant or an article, and I don't know the verbiage, the terms or whatever, I think that it should be at least considered. I think town meeting is confusing. Again, I'm embarrassing myself, but I have to say when I left town meeting within the next 2 weeks when I was walking my dog in my own neighborhood, countless neighbors came up to me. Nada, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you said something because I don't know what happened either. And I'm not talking 1 or 2 people. I'm talking at least 20 people that attended town meeting in May, thanked me for getting up and embarrassing myself and saying, does anyone else in this room understand what just happened? It needs to be, again, with all due respect to the town moderator, it needs to be explained so that people understand. And I'm not a schoonjilly. I'm not. I mean, I try to understand and I want to be active participant in this town. And my other thing about this warrant or whatever it is, excuse me, I don't think that it should be buried at the end of the town meeting articles, because when I look back in May town meeting, the controversial articles were like 22, 23, 24. The residents had dwindled. So by the time it came to take a vote, it wasn't a fair vote. By 11 o'clock at night, with all due respect, you're saying it's getting late, it's 10:20, you want to go home. Well, when you're at town, wherever the town meeting was, at the high school or wherever we went, it's 11:30 at night. It was supposed to end at 10:45 and it didn't. So this is just how I feel. It's confusing, and I think that the board really, or this commission, you need to consider this. It's important. Town administrator, I had discussed with him about where these warrants fall, in what order, and Mr. Gillette told me that he discusses it with the Board of Selectmen, I think, and with one other commission or body. And I think that serious consideration has to be given where, you know, we're looking at this and accepting streets. Well, controversial articles should be in the forefront at town meeting, not buried 3 hours into town meeting and then it's continued to the next night. Again, I know I embarrassed myself, but I feel free. I encourage all of you to look at the video of May 2017 town meeting and ask yourself, do I really know what just happened? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Bill DeLay, 148 School Street. I'll make it quick. I just believe that if a citizen makes a petition, it should be an up or down vote.
Any other? Yeah, Dottie?
Dottie Powers, town clerk, Westwood resident. As the person that sees the petition articles that come in, and I commend anybody who does put forth a petition article, there is a lot of work involved. A lot of times when they come in, they're not written well, so they're not understood, which is why maybe there's indefinite postponement. When we did the charter, we redid the charter back in 2012, we put together a whole pre-petition process. And it's there for people that do want to put a petition forth to look at that. Go to our town council so you can get advice on how to write that article best so that it's going to go to town meeting and people are going to understand it. And when it goes to FinCom, FinCom will also understand the content of it.
Any other questions or comments? With that, we will close the public hearing, and FinCom will remain to discuss the articles. Yeah, I'm just signing out. Folks, I think we're just going to keep talking. If we can hear me, my inclination would be to try to get through as much as we can tonight. I know that we set aside tomorrow night, but I think my sense is that people would like to see how much we can get done. I know it's getting late. I also know that we're going to miss at least one person tomorrow night if we don't finish tonight, and that's Mike. And I would like him to be here as much as possible.
Let's do this.
My suggestion, and I don't, again, we hadn't initially planned for tomorrow night's meeting when we set up the schedule. I suspect that some of you may also have conflicts.
Miriam, we can't hear you with the background.
You know what? I'm going to come around.
Or you can tell her, ask everybody to clear the room that everybody's leaving. Don't talk in here.
Need to discuss.
We could just ask folks if you're on your way out, just to talk outside. You're welcome to stay, of course. Sometimes what we do is come around.
You can sit up at the table.
Too professorial. Okay, it's quiet now. My suggestion would be that we start with the petitioner articles, so that we can start there while we have a full complement of people. So I suppose we could start in the order in which they were presented tonight by the petitioners, the first being Mr. Barrett's article. For the folks, our newer members, what we typically do is I'll ask for a motion. To approve the article, to recommend that it be approved, or a motion to recommend indefinite postponement. If a motion is seconded, we will then have a further discussion, and then call the vote once the discussion has run its course. So with respect to Mr. Barrett's article, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion for indefinite postponement.
I'll second.
Okay, so the motion's been made to recommend indefinite postponement, and it's been seconded. Further discussion.
I believe this would be disastrous for the planning board. They would not be able to attract development to the level that the town is desirous of, and things would be piecemealed, much like what you see down at Washington Street by the Dunkin' Donuts there. Single little buildings. There would be no comprehensive plan. Neither would respond to the other. It would, and not to mention that it would put us in a possible legal jeopardy, changing the minimum project size. I think the way it's written, it's just a blanket approach, and it's not thoughtful, just on that one aspect of the minimum project side, how it rescinds that as well. I don't see any warrant or any merit to this from a global perspective of the town development, attracting development and developing in the future.
Mike? Mike and then Mike.
Did we, am I wrong, did we not discuss the footnote issue at great length last year?
Yes.
I feel like we did.
Yeah,
You know, so to the extent that he didn't intend to withdraw the minimum lot size question, or minimum size question, if he intended to address the footnote again, we do have a bylaw provision that prohibits us from revisiting defeated bylaw amendments within 2 years. This fails on that
what,
procedural grounds.
what was the actual article last year? And how was that written? What was that
It was to
addressing?
get rid of the
It was to
bylaw.
eliminate the footnote.
Just
Yeah,
the
fi-
footnote.
Just the
Just the
footnote.
Amend
footnote.
the bylaw to eliminate the footnote, which is
Right.
what he wants to do. He-
Right, I know,
He
but
didn't intend
he's-
the other stuff.
Right, I know, but again, that speaks to, this is a
Yeah.
poorly worded
I think it's been
article.
firmly written, and that's sort of, so just thinking about it, I would vote against it on procedure for both those reasons. But then substantively, it's sort of been asked and answered, and also it's kind of at the wrong form. Like, if they want to revisit this, they really have to go back to the planning board and think about it in the context of everything else that the planning board's doing. I think that's probably why we have this bylaw in place that says we don't revisit these things every year and kind of hope that eventually we slide one by. We take it to the planning board and fit it into the broader planning scheme that they're working on.
Mike?
You know, I agree with both Mike and Chris, because, and obviously, we had this debate last year, had this discussion last year, but through it all, aside from the points Chris made relative to how it weakens what the planning board's authority is, it could be potentially, the sense that I got, the basis for it was some nefarious, he believed there was some nefarious act that took place that brought him to the point to do this, and I couldn't understand, and still don't understand where he was coming from or what he believes someone's motive was, so.
There were implications.
Yeah, so, but bottom line is, to let this go through in the way it was, it just doesn't make sense. Confused.
Do people want any further discussion on this, or are people comfortable voting?
Comfortable voting.
Okay. So all in favor of the motion to recommend indefinite postponement, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Unanimous vote to recommend indefinite postponement. We'll just remind people.
It's Mike O'Hara.
Mike O'Hara, right. Okay. All right, so the next two petitioner articles are Ms. Rawlings' articles, which are interrelated, of course, but we'll take them one by one. The first is to see if the town will vote to raise, appropriate, and transfer from available funds in the treasury the sum of $20,000 to purchase an electronic voting system for use at town meeting with 350 handheld units. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion for indefinite postponement. I think this is going to be kind of superfluous to what the town's doing, which is more thoughtful and addressing all the other.
Let's just get your motions.
Motion.
Motion for indefinite postponement, and it's been seconded by Howard?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Discussion.
I think that if the town wants to go this way, they're going the right route, and they're going to think about issues like, you know, the quorum and a lot of other issues, and it's, you know, maybe it might not be quite as fast enough as they want, but I think it's more sensible, more thoughtful.
And they didn't ask for funding for the pilot, so they seem to have the resources they need.
Well, I think that when you go with a company, they kind of fund the pilot because they want to try to sell the thing to you.
First one's free.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, you know, I think there have been a number of issues raised just in terms of the number of units that are included here may not be sufficient, the funds may not be sufficient. And in light, I think, in light of the fact that the town does have a plan for a pilot and to really get a sense of what people in town want, that's a helpful context in which to consider this. People want further discussion on this, or ready to vote?
Vote.
Okay. All right,
Are we
all
voting
in
on
favor?
both petition articles?
One at a time.
Okay.
I think we should do one at a time.
Okay.
All in favor of the motion to recommend indefinite postponement, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or or abstaining? It's a unanimous vote in favor of recommending indefinite postponement.
That's Jim.
And that's Jim writing that one up. Okay, so now we'll take Ms. Rawlings' second article relative to, I'm just going to summarize this, changing the bylaws with respect to electronic voting, which is Article O on our table here tonight. Is there a motion with respect to this article?
Is it out here postponed?
It's on the back page.
Was there a second?
No, we did that.
Second, thank you, Rob.
Now we're doing
So the
the
motion
vote.
has been made to recommend indefinite postponement, and it's been seconded.
doing the money one.
Further discussion on this?
Move the question.
Are people comfortable moving
Yeah.
the
Which
question?
one are we doing? Are we doing the money one now, or the?
We're doing O.
Yes,
Oh,
the money.
okay. So,
Okay, the
What was the
question,
money one on my document?
the question
Yes.
has been moved. I just want to make sure. People comfortable voting?
Yeah.
Okay.
we already did it.
All in favor of indefinite postponement, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? That's a unanimous vote in favor of indefinite postponement, and that's also Jim. Thank you, Jim. That brings us to Ms. Conant's article relative to amending the bylaws with respect to petitioner articles, which is otherwise identified as P on our table for tonight. Is there a motion with respect to this article?
Motion to accept this one.
And that's
Is that
from Jim?
I'll second it.
Okay, so there's a motion to approve, and it's been seconded. Further discussion?
Can I ask, I guess as I think about this on the heels of electronic voting and the point made by the woman at the end, and I think all of us, I'm concerned if we're moving first with electronic voting, and then there is confusion about motions, and I think they're not only petitioner-based, it's the terms indefinite postponement, et cetera. But my real concern is, I do think there's some value when we stand that you realize, oh, my contingent is standing, so I feel confident in the vote that I'm making. And I'm concerned if we change this language at the time we're also changing electronic voting, we're kind of doing a couple of different procedural things at once. And I don't know if they make sense to do simultaneously. So just a thought.
Howard?
I don't think this is well thought out, because the purpose of the Finance Commission's motion being the first is so that the Finance Commission's recommendation is presented to the town. If our motion isn't presented first, technically our recommendation isn't presented to the town. Because if you vote on the mover's, the motion, you vote either yes or no. If you vote yes, we don't have a motion. If you vote no, we don't have a motion. Unless we changed our procedures, which I don't know what's involved in that, so that we vote yes or no and present that recommendation before the movers or as part of the process. So I don't know if this is really a completed thought. I understand the idea of getting rid of indefinite postponement, but I'm not sure how it interacts with the Finance Commission's job and their recommendations.
I think Howard's point is very, very well taken. And the other thought I had here just listening is, these tend to be very controversial issues. And maybe, maybe the explanation of indefinite postponement has to be, discussed in front of town meeting, what it means. So I tend to agree with Howard that unless we are allowed to vote yes or no first on that underlying article, then how does the town really know what our thinking is or is not in that article?
Well, they're gonna have our opinion in front of them, and all this says is they don't have to undo our opinion before they can have discussion. So this is true to the democratic process. They can open
What's
it
our
up.
vote then? What would our vote be? In other words, if you know that the underlying petition is coming up first, forget the word indefinite postponement, are we allowed to say with some term, we are voting against this underlying component?
That would be synonymous with indefinite proposal. We're voting against it, for whatever reason.
Do we have to change our procedure?
Let's just make sure we take turns so we're not talking over each other. Let me go Howard and then Mike.
Let me just I would say if we're gonna do this, you'd also have to add a bylaw that says specifically the town's finance commission's recommendation has to be presented to the town. Simply giving a book with our written opinions is not even in the bylaws, I don't think. So, you wanna be technical about this committee about, you need to change more than just this.
Yeah, so
Mike?
I want to just expand on what Howard's saying. If you read, I had the pleasure of reading Town Meeting Times the last week. It was great. The warrant sets forth the four corners of an idea, and then somebody has to make a motion. And the whole purpose of having a finance and warrant commission is that you have an independent body of townspeople. That we're not the selectmen, we're not the plan, we're not elected, we're just 15 people plucked from the town who have volunteered to study these issues a little longer than the next town person. We're town meeting people who've just got more time and more hours in on this one issue. So the whole purpose is, here's the warrant, these guys are studying it, and these guys who are a subset of us as the town are giving us their studied recommendation on it. We could do it the way I think Jim and Tom are envisioning it, which is, we just write something and say, here's our recommendation, but let the person who makes that warrant make his own motion. You could do that. It's extremely rare. It almost obviates the need for having a FinCom, frankly. But almost, other than the 2 or 3 towns she cited, it's almost always the case that somebody on behalf of town meeting, not on behalf of town, on behalf of town meeting, studies it. That group says, I've looked at this, I've studied it for a while. I'm going to give you my considered recommendation in the form of a motion. Because if I write up a warrant and I say we should build a bridge between my house and a liquor store, I'm going to move that we accept that. But no one who's studied it independently is going to opine on it unless you take some other measure like Howard is suggesting, which is to say, okay, all you are is an advisory opinion. So I get up, I make my recommendation in support of my own warrant. And then we have to have some new bylaw that says the FinCom has to get up, come to the table and say, we've studied this, and we think you should vote against that motion. Either way, it's confusing. So the question is, what independent entity that studied it, that works on behalf of town meeting, can give an informed opinion on that warrant? There is no other body other than us. And if a petitioner is there's no petitioner that's ever going to say, here's my warrant article, I recommend you all vote against it. No one's ever going to do that. Obviously, a petitioner's motion will be in favor of his or her warrant article. So I agree with Howard. I think you're redoing the entire FinCom and town meeting process if you vote in favor of her warrant. It's not to say it isn't thoughtful. She put a lot of thought into it. But I just don't, I think it's a complete rabbit hole.
Cindy and Barb.
So expanding on that, I think that if you look at the first petitioner article that we voted on tonight, Chris told us that it would be disastrous for the town. If they were just allowed to go to the town meeting floor and say, I move to, vote my motion without the benefit of hearing Nora's explanation or town council's explanation, the emotion of it will get that voted through. We all voted to indefinitely postpone that article. So I think that it's difficult to now then go back and say, well, actually, we shouldn't be allowed to do that. So I think that needs to be taken into account. And secondly, I think that we take the emotion out of it. So as an independent body, we can look at what everybody else is telling us and make a motion on what's going on. That in the heat of the moment and in town meeting, if we're talking about shortening town meeting, I think this will increase the length of town meeting, make it longer, more confusing. And I said last June, I think the process works. It's confusing, but in every instance where we've indefinitely postponed an article, not every instance, but there are a lot of instances where we have indefinitely postponed an article that motion has been overturned. There's been a lot of fruitful discussion, and then it still gets voted down, which is how the process is supposed to work. So maybe this needs to change to just be an up and down vote. That needs to be a bylaw change. I think this is too broad in its scope, and I don't think that it's a good idea.
Every article that we look at from a town board has gone through hearings and votes by town boards, and the petitioner articles are we're the only one that vets them. So, I think that you know, when a planning board puts an article forward, we have our recommendation, but they get up and announce that they've had such and such public hearing and they voted 4 to 1 or whatever on it. And I think it's important that we say our thing. Indefinite postponement, I know, is confusing. If we maybe could give a recommendation that we recommend you vote for it or you vote against it, maybe that's, like you said, simplify that. Apparently, it's multiple syllabic words that are a problem. And people think that it's postponement, meaning, you know, it doesn't really say no. It sounds like it's something more than no. Yeah, like we're not even interested in it. But I think we need to.
I'm sorry. Mike, in that wonderful book that you read last week or this week, how long what's the history of indefinite postponement? Is it part of a?
It's in Robert's Rule.
Okay, so that was established as a matter of course. This is the procedures, yeah, and.
Well, we'll talk more about this after this meeting, because to introduce there are options beyond, indefinite postponement is a way of saying, don't adopt this at this meeting. There's a lot of different things. We could, for example, in the future, say, we recommend that you don't adopt this at this meeting, but you refer it to a committee. For example, we have the right procedurally to have done that, I think, today with regard to the electronic voting, if we were sort of advanced enough in our thinking about it. We'll talk about that when we have more time too. This is something we can't decide tonight.
As I understand our role as a group and established way back when, and, you know, gives rise to the town meetings, is that the expectation is that the entire town isn't here listening to each and every issue that's brought forward. That's our role, to a certain degree. So given that structure, it continues to be our responsibility to provide them with information, and our thought is they're looking forward to the information that we are sharing with them in our opinion. Why would we change that?
You know, I think we're all saying the same thing in different ways. You know, I think what we're discussing are checks and balances in the town, and we provide that check and balance on the petitioner articles, which are not otherwise vetted, which is part of our duty under the bylaws to advise the town. So, you know, I think to send forth an article without our motion is okay, somewhat nullifying our duties under the bylaws.
Last dance.
Just wave them.
Thank you.
Here we go. No.
It's our energy saving.
Times are hard.
Yeah.
Looks good. Looks good. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Thank you, Sarah.
Marianne, I
Yeah,
just wanted to
Chris,
say,
please.
I agree with everything that I've heard from this end. I don't understand why things are different simply because a resident brought forth an opinion to change a law in our town. Why is that different than the planning board or the selectmen? I don't get why we hold them to a different standard in this case that they're proposing. It really doesn't make sense to me. And when she posted up there that 4 petition articles had been voted indefinite postponement, I think that's a little misleading. While the vote may have been that way, I think it's for good reason, in that it's probably not written properly, or it's not vetted globally. Like, that's what we do. They didn't do that before they wrote, like, eliminate the footnote. Oh yeah, but we'll forget about that other thing about the minimum project size. If they had thought that through, they would have realized that's not a good article. But they didn't, so they brought it and we voted it down. And I think that's what happened to those 4 articles. It wasn't that the ideas had no merit, it's the way they wrote the article was improper and poor. And we're talking about changing our town laws. I don't think just because Joe Schwartz or Amy whatever brings it forward, we say, okay, you can go talk to the town and let the emotion carry the day and whatever. It seems ludicrous to me to abandon our practices here, just simply because a resident brings forward an idea for a law change.
Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not looking at this in front of the petitioner's argument that we're dismissing petition arguments. I'm looking at it as the ability to open up discussion. We struggled with this the end of last year and early this year about, in essence, killing petitioner articles without, it going to the floor of the town meeting. Right now, all the town meeting here is 15 members voted on it, yay or nay, and that's it. But if you want to open it up for discussion on the floor, you've got to beat those 15 members, and then you get to discuss it. I think all we're doing now is saying, you can discuss it. FinCom still has its opinion out there. We still say it's, indefinite proposal. We don't agree with it. And I think it would be more incumbent on the FinCom to get up there and present our position, as opposed to just hiding behind, a little paragraph blurb on what we stood for.
Are people ready to vote on this one?
Yep.
Yes, okay. So the motion is, has been made to recommend the article. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Nay.
Aye.
Nay, sorry, I should have said nay. Let's just do that again. All opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Any abstaining? Okay. That motion failed. We now need
A motion to indefinitely postpone. I'll make that motion.
Second.
Second, okay. All in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed?
Opposed.
Okay, any abstentions? Okay, that motion carries.
13-2.
No, we're short one.
I'm sorry.
12-2?
Yes.
Okay. All right, folks, so that leaves us with 12 other articles. People ready to vote on those?
Let's
Okay,
do it.
Let's do it.
I keep forgetting I'm on
Cindy,
camera.
that's your write-up.
Yeah, I know.
And we'll
Thank you.
help.
Okay.
If you want, we're here.
Thank you.
Okay, so Blue Hills Technical Regional School District Renovation Project. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion on it? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Unanimous vote in favor. Next, B.
That's Tom, excuse me for interrupting you.
Oh,
Tom
thank you,
McKenna.
thank you, Jane. Second one, Gay Street Sidewalk Design Funding. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any further discussion on
May
this?
I just add, does anyone else have difficulty with this one? I am so torn between not wanting the sidewalk on Gay Street, but then also thinking that a sidewalk might be a good thing, and I just can't really wrap my head around it, especially because having a cross in the middle of the road is exactly what happened on 109, and we just fixed it after 8 years of me trying to get a sidewalk on 109. So I just don't want to see a sidewalk get built that maybe people aren't all that excited about anyway, and then have to have it fixed further on down the line.
I've got Mike and then George.
I'm sorry, I just
No,
Well, let
think
me-
it's torn, and
let
so
me-
I want to hear what other people have to say.
I was struggling with the same thing, and then what gave me some comfort was the fact that someone said, this is a study. So we're not voting or recommending that we're gonna go do it. What the recommendation before us is, should we conduct a study? At some point down the road, there'll be ample time to sleep on it, and then ultimately make a decision.
I just want to make a comment, and I didn't want to say anything when they were here, but, I lived in Needham for 22 years. It's a sidewalk city. You can walk anywhere and everywhere in that town and still get a sense of being in a very beautiful town. I live on a very bucolic road, Rock Meadow Road, probably one of the prettiest roads in town with our stone walls and everything. We have a lot of little kids in the neighborhood, and the one thing I hear from parents over and over again, they don't feel safe with their kids walking even on those roads. So to me, times are changing, and I think that I look at the High Rock Street, Dover Road, Conant, cut through, the town tried to control it humps, and I look at all these little kids and there are no sidewalks, and I think you gotta protect these children. And, even in my neighborhood, I see, if the town had to take part of my property and move my rock walls, go ahead and do it for the safety of these kids. And I understand this, but this is not in my backyard. That's what I heard here loud and clear. you know, people with beautiful pieces of property, but, you know, I honestly do not think the people walking by drop bottles of liquor on that guy's sidewalk. Those got tossed out of a car window, somebody going by. But I just think that, you know, to me, it's the safety of the kids in this town, and the neighborhoods. We need more sidewalks.
Mary Ann, can I?
Yeah, Judy, I'm sorry, couldn't see you.
No, I think my only question was, and it is only committing to design money, but I'm not so sure that this, I think there are other streets that the money might be better spent on, but I trust that they've done the due diligence. But I support and I think Mike said they don't go out to bid, so there's no option of saying, I mean, 200,000 seems 20% of perhaps the total cost is a bit of money in my eyes that we're voting on tonight to spend $200,000. That's more of my concern, but without knowing the design, I don't feel I can support or not support what's best on Gay Street, you know?
Yeah, I guess I'll,
Oh, no,
I was gonna recognize myself, Barb and Howard.
well, Howard first.
I just
Oh, and Jim.
viscerally say, I live off of Pond Street, which is a relatively busy street that has a sidewalk. It's very nice to have a sidewalk on Pond Street.
Okay.
I've met nice people.
Okay.
I've had great interactions along there. Yeah, maybe the people who live on Pond would rather not have the sidewalk in front of their house. I understand that, but it's been great to have that there.
I think what ends up happening is we say it's a design, but if it's a design, it's gonna be, well, we already spent this money
Yeah.
for the design. And that's, this time around, I was kinda thinking, you know, I think I wanna kinda stop
Bit in
now.
the bud.
And if they wanna put it on Summer Street instead, I'd be very happy for that. I don't think they get a lot of objection either, but.
Jim?
Yeah, I don't know if adding sidewalks is going to encourage people to walk, or the reverse is true, that if you don't have sidewalks, people aren't gonna walk. But my concern is, as Cindy said, if they're gonna have you cross the street, if you can put sidewalks on both sides, you cross, you're encouraging, or I don't wanna say encouraging, but, you know, the likelihood of accidents is increasing, coupled with the fact that they mentioned that they're going to shrink the side of the road, and now you're adding bicycles. So you're bringing pedestrians, cyclists, and cars in more close proximity, which is gonna increase your chances of failure. You know, study or no study, I don't think I can support it.
Tom?
I think, well, like Cindy, I have the concern of the having a crossover, but I think that I agree, I think the street needs a sidewalk. I think that, I don't think it's going to have a positive impact on the health of this nation or the town, but I think that it needs, a sidewalk, and I think anyone that's driven on that road and sees runners or bikers or what have you, or anyone that's walked or run on that road, and I've walked a bunch of times, Mike probably runs it, I walk.
You probably still go faster.
It's incredibly dangerous. It really is, and so, you know, there were changes done to Canton Street for, you know, sort of speed mitigation and all with the islands and whatnot, and so, yeah, narrowing could be a concern, but as Mike said, it's a design study, and I agree with Barb. I think that, yes, if you approve the design study of 200 grand and change, then it probably leads down that path, but I am a supporter of that path, and I think that there'll be very thoughtful, sort of, you know, thoughtful minds that hopefully find a way, you know, a way that makes sense to get that done. And I do agree with George. I think that it was very apparent that it's, you know, sort of, you know, not in my yard type of thing.
Right.
But it's very, very, we didn't really have much of the other side represented here tonight. A couple of folks, but and from a strategic standpoint, Gay Street makes sense. It does tie the two town centers together. You know, Summer Street is on the way to Dedham Country and Polo, and Clapboard Tree just doesn't make, as Brendan Ryan said, while it'd be nice, it doesn't make as much feasible sense.
And if I can follow up on that.
And I have beer bottles in our yard too, and I live in a dead end.
Tom and I, we actually live in the same neighborhood, and, you know, what you have to understand is that when you live at the bottom of town, like, that's sort of how I consider it, right? We're at the bottom, and you follow Gay to the top. If you live down there, there's no way your kids can get up into town. You can't go Clapper Tree, and you can't go Gay. There's no way for your kids to ride their bike to the library or go up into town. You have Islington, which is great, but for anything that's up in town, there's no way to get up there unless you're in a car, okay? No way. And my kids are a little older now, so it's not so much of an issue, but when they were younger, that was a real thing, because they were cut off. They couldn't go up there. So, and you know, for people who live on this side of town, you may not realize that, but they really are cut off. And, you know, I remember trying to fire up my kids to, you know, go to school, start talking about a sidewalk so you can, you know, get that done. Here we are, we're talking about it. But it really is a division, and it's very dangerous for those runners, and I'm a runner too, but I would never run on Gay Street because it's, even against traffic, I just think, and I see them all the time, with the sun coming down, it's bad. I have a real concern about crossing Gay Street. I have a real concern about that, and I want to see what they come up with for safety, and they've got to look at that. But I do think that is a street that would allow the folks, even over by Clapper Tree in Islington, to get up, because you're never, Clapper Tree is a whole other story. And that's not going to be happening anytime soon.
You can't get
So,
over there from
think
Thatcher.
about, you know, with all these conversations we've had about Islington and this side of town, I think it really could be a bridge for the folks at the bottom of the hill.
Marion, can I end with one thing too? A couple folks mentioned that they haven't heard of any accidents or fatalities. When's it gonna happen? So that, are we just, do we continue on the way we are because we're lucky? Or do we do what's probably, well, what I think to be the smart and safe maneuver?
I mean, Nahatan and Clabber Tree, I've witnessed probably 5 or 6 accidents just standing at the church, so, you know, that's.
I'm just piling on, but really, things have changed with distracted drivers. If you walk down the road like that, you see cars moving like this, and you can see the drivers actually just looking. It's very scary with other side.
Plenty of people that are up and down.
Definitely agreeing that we should do this. I am concerned about the crossover.
Yeah.
Even if it's just one.
Yep.
Who's writing this up?
Me.
This article is Rob.
Okay. You got all this, Rob?
We haven't voted yet,
Are
right?
people comfortable voting?
I'm comfortable voting.
So it was a motion to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed?
One opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, that motion carries. Okay, the next one is ARC of South Norfolk, grant of easement for permanent sidewalk. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Unanimous vote in favor. Next, street acceptance, Thompson Avenue. Is there a motion?
Make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Unanimous vote in favor. Article E, accounting, housekeeping, establish account for meals and hotel taxes. Is there a motion?
Motion approved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Unanimous vote in favor.
That's Barb. Yep.
Barb. Article F, accounting, housekeeping, establish account for school special education reserve. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Has been seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? It's unanimous vote in favor.
Also Barb.
Also Barb. Next, Article G, zoning amendment to limit number of residential dwelling units in FMUOD 6 and 7. Is there a motion?
Motion approved.
Second.
Motion to approve, it's been seconded. Any further discussion on this one?
Just I want to make a comment. It's probably comes from the Islington Task Force. Whoever writes this up, my thought is I'm guessing somebody will attempt to amend this on the floor to reduce the number from 90 down. We need to be ready for that, whoever does the write-up, because I'm just sensing from the Islington Task Force.
I'm doing it.
Yeah, there still is I get this feeling of a negative movement towards any type of additional residential development at all in Islington. I don't think it's the High Street, I think it's the Islington area. So, Chris, just think that through when you write it up. And I know that Nora's explanation has been excellent, and we did, I fed her the question at the Islington Task Force. She went through the full explanation like she did here. Once people hear it, they get it. But when they just see a number, my guess is somebody's gonna make a motion to reduce it to 25 to 10 or something. So just give that some thought.
Quick comment on it?
Yeah.
I'm really glad Chris is writing this up because I think he understands all the nuance of it. But I actually think this is one of the best warrant articles I've ever seen, in part because of how it came to us. It came to us from the Economic Development Officer, whose job is to attract development, among other things. Planning Board sponsored it. Their job is to think about housing stock and all kinds of zoning issues. The selectmen have to worry about both those things, and they have to worry about sort of the tone of the town and the voice of the people. So all three of them came together on this issue. And it seems to me what this says is, nothing is worse for business development than not knowing what the law is gonna be or what the rule is gonna be. So they put a bright line in here. Look, we're not saying 500, but we're not saying 20. We're giving you a number. And also, at the same time, we're telling the residents, it's not gonna run away from you. This is the max it's gonna be. So it's a great way to draw developers in, at the same time not scaring the residents. I think it's a really well-crafted.
Are you gonna do a full presentation, Nora, at the town meeting on this? I mean, like the explanation you've given here and at Task Force? So people understand the rationale of the 90, so it's got like an anchor to it?
I think you want to hit on the fact that it's both attracting development of the kind that we're looking for, but also comforting residents that it won't run away from us. That's why I think it's just a smart, really smart.
Right, Mike, if I could just add quickly too, I think that, and it was apparent that there was confusion on it, and that 90 is more restrictive than the way it is today.
Right.
And I think that if that's sort of the emphasis of it, so that people understand that it is more restrictive than if the article didn't exist, if things just stayed the same. So that was, I mean, you made it clear, but it might not have.
Being read that way.
Yeah, you see a number and you go, oh.
The reality is 90 is probably the most it could ever have gotten built anyway.
Right.
But when it just says 50% of gross floor area, they don't know what that
Right,
means. They can't envision what's the total? So that's why they started in their mind, go, oh, it must be 400 or 500 units?
Well, the
'Cause that's a
pictures
lot
that
of
were
area.
shown at town meeting that look like, all
Well,
this
this says
development.
can't bring one upland, but it does say, if you're a developer that wants to do the kind of project we're thinking about, we are open for business, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
It doesn't scare them away either, so it's really well done.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? It's unanimous vote in favor, and that is Chris. Okay, we've got 3 planning board articles, the first one being H, zoning amendment related to accessory uses in highway business. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
So there's nothing, I'm doing this write-up, no one has any reason to believe there's any hidden issues in this, right? Okay.
We haven't heard of any opposition.
Not to say
Yep.
that there won't be something.
Cindy,
Highway business, it's very
Cindy
small.
astutely raised the tax issue on this, and we got an answer on that.
What
so.
about vending machines and obesity?
Especially since we now know who owns the
Well, if we
property.
get a sidewalk, we're covered.
That's right.
There's
Yeah,
no
as long as we
obesity.
put the sidewalks
Right.
in. Yeah.
They cancel each other out.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Unanimous vote in favor. Next, Article I, zoning amendment related to medical uses. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
It's been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Unanimously in favor. Planning Board Article J, Housekeeping zoning articles.
I'm sorry, excuse me, that was Mike Powers.
Oh, medical uses,
Yeah.
Mike. So now we're on J, Housekeeping zoning articles. Is there a motion?
I'll make a
Motion to
motion to
approve.
approve.
Motion to approve, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining?
No, someone else made the motion.
Okay, we've got two more left. Article K, Town Clerk's article to adopt Mass General Laws, Chapter 41, Section 110A. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve?
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Unanimous vote in favor. And that is who, Jane?
That is
Me.
Cindy.
Cindy. And lastly, Article L, Town Clerk's article to adopt General Bylaw Amendment, Mass General Laws, Chapter 140, Section 139C, waived dog license fee for seniors. Is there a motion?
I'll make it.
Is it to approve?
Approve, yes, motion to approve.
Second.
And that's been seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? It's unanimous vote in favor. And we are done voting. Thank you, everybody.
That's it, we're done.
And
Make
we
a
will
motion to
see you
adjourn?
at
We
town
need to
meeting.
vote those.
One vote.
Oh,
Make a motion to adjourn?
Can we approve the minutes?
Approved.
Yes, just one more
George, we
minute.
have to approve minutes.
George is wandering around
George,
again.
George.
George, we already have you on video once wandering around. Get back to your seat, please.
Okay.
didn't adjourn the meeting.
I didn't.
I tried.
Would somebody kindly make a motion
I'll make
to
a-
approve the minutes from September 26th and September 12th?
Sure.
To approve the minutes from September 12th and October.
26th.
September 26th and September 12th.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed, abstaining? No. Lastly, folks, very important, Jane needs your write-ups by close of business on Friday. So we can get them done over the weekend. That means Jane and I, because she needs to get them to the printer on Monday. So, sorry for the tight turnaround. You're used to it. Thank you very much. And is there a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.